My name is Connor Radcliffe, and the events I'm about to recount occurred during the summer of 2004. At the time, I was 19 years old, working as a counselor at Camp Silver Lake in Pennsylvania. The decision to take this position was driven by a desire to distance myself from my parents' constant pressuring and to earn money for my impending college education. Camp Silver Lake was situated in a picturesque location, surrounded by dense forests and centered around a pristine lake. The main lodge, a large wooden structure, served as the hub of camp activities. Surrounding it were numerous cabins for campers and staff, as well as various activity areas for sports, crafts, and outdoor pursuits. Upon my arrival at the camp, I was struck by the serene atmosphere. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and the sounds of nature. It was a stark contrast to the urban environment I had left behind, and I found myself looking forward to the summer ahead. The week before the campers' arrival was dedicated to staff orientation and preparation. It was during this time that I became acquainted with my fellow counselors. There was Evan, an athletic individual with a penchant for organizing physical activities and a seemingly boundless energy for long-distance running. Cassidy was our resident artist, always eager to engage in creative projects and share her passion for arts and crafts. Maddie, a longtime camp attendee turned counselor, naturally assumed a leadership role among us. As I was unpacking my belongings in one of the staff cabins, Maddie entered, clipboard in hand. Her demeanor was professional and focused, a testament to her experience with the camp's operations. "Connor," she said, her tone businesslike, "you're assigned to kitchen duty this evening. Please ensure everything runs smoothly." I nodded in acknowledgement, attempting to inject some levity into the conversation. "I'll do my best not to burn down the camp. If I do, we can always blame it on the legendary ghost of Silver Lake." Maddie's serious expression softened slightly, and she allowed herself a small chuckle. "I'm sure the campers would find that entertaining. Just focus on your responsibilities, please." As Maddie left, I returned to my unpacking, my mind wandering to the summer ahead. Little did I know that my joke about camp ghosts would prove to be unnervingly prescient. The subsequent days were filled with preparation activities. We cleaned and organized the cabins, checked the safety equipment, and planned the summer's activities. The atmosphere among the staff was one of anticipation and excitement. When the campers arrived, the camp burst into life. The air filled with the sounds of laughter, splashing water, and the general commotion of children enjoying their summer adventure. I was assigned to oversee Cabin 6, housing a group of boys aged 12 to 13. They were an energetic bunch, full of enthusiasm for the camp activities. However, one camper in particular, Jameson, proved to be a challenge. He had a habit of sneaking out after lights out, necessitating frequent retrieval missions on my part. Each time, I would remind him of the potential dangers lurking in the surrounding woods, emphasizing the ease with which one could become lost in the dense forest. As the first week progressed, we settled into a routine of activities: hiking, swimming, crafts, and campfire gatherings. The days were long and tiring, but there was a sense of fulfillment in guiding the campers through their experiences. It was during this time that I began to notice subtle changes in the camp's atmosphere. At first, it was easy to dismiss: a unexplained rustle in the bushes, a shadow glimpsed from the corner of my eye. But as the days wore on, these occurrences became more frequent, and a sense of unease began to permeate the camp. Little did we know that these small disturbances were merely the prelude to the terrifying events that would soon unfold, forever changing our lives and the history of Camp Silver Lake. The weekend marking the end of our first week at Camp Silver Lake began like any other. The air was filled with the excited chatter of campers anticipating a day of activities. However, as the staff gathered for our morning meeting, an unsettling realization dawned upon us. Maddie was absent. Initially, we attributed her absence to ordinary causes. Perhaps she had overslept or decided to take an early morning swim in the lake. However, as the hours passed with no sign of her, our concern grew exponentially. Evan, ever the proactive individual, took charge of the situation. "All right, everyone," he announced, his voice carrying a mixture of authority and concern. "We need to organize a search. We'll divide into pairs and cover every inch of this camp. Check the cabins, the lake, and the surrounding woods. Leave no stone unturned." I was paired with Cassidy for the search. As we ventured into the dense forest surrounding the camp, an eerie silence enveloped us. The usual sounds of wildlife seemed muted, adding to the growing sense of unease. "Maddie," we called out repeatedly, our voices echoing through the trees. The lack of response was disconcerting. As we pushed deeper into the woods, the underbrush became thicker, scratching at our legs and snagging our clothing. The canopy overhead grew denser, casting deep shadows across our path. It was in one of these shadowy areas that we made a chilling discovery. Lying on the ground, partially obscured by fallen leaves, was Maddie's clipboard. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. Maddie was known for her meticulous nature. The idea of her carelessly discarding her clipboard was inconceivable. Cassidy's face paled as she knelt to retrieve the clipboard. "This isn't good, Connor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maddie wouldn't just leave this behind." I nodded in agreement, a knot forming in my stomach. "Let's head back and report this to the others. Maybe they've found something more." As we made our way back to the camp, the forest seemed to close in around us. Every snapping twig and rustling leaf set our nerves on edge. The camp, which had always felt like a safe haven, now seemed vulnerable and exposed. Upon our return, we gathered with the other counselors at the main lodge. The atmosphere was tense as each pair reported their findings, or lack thereof. No one had seen any sign of Maddie beyond the clipboard we had discovered. Evan, his usual confidence somewhat shaken, made the decision we all knew was necessary. "We need to contact the authorities," he stated firmly. "This is beyond our capabilities to handle." The arrival of the police brought a new level of gravity to the situation. As they took our statements and began their own search, the reality of Maddie's disappearance began to sink in. The campers, sensing the adults' distress, became anxious and fearful. For days, the police scoured the area, utilizing search dogs and even a helicopter. But as the search wore on with no results, a sense of hopelessness began to set in. After a week of fruitless searching, the police were forced to scale back their efforts, leaving us with more questions than answers. In the wake of the police departure, we attempted to restore some semblance of normalcy to the camp. Activities resumed, but there was an undercurrent of tension that permeated every aspect of camp life. Every unexpected sound, every shadow, seemed to hold the potential for danger. It was against this backdrop of fear and uncertainty that the next shocking event occurred. One night during my routine bed check, I discovered Jameson's bunk empty. The realization that another person had vanished hit me like a physical blow. With a sense of dread, I roused Evan and Cassidy, and we embarked on another search. As we ventured into the woods calling Jameson's name, the darkness seemed to press in around us, filled with unseen threats. It was then that I noticed a faint light in the distance, barely visible through the dense foliage. "Look," I said, pointing towards the light. "Over there." As we approached, we realized the light was coming from a dilapidated cabin, one that was not marked on any of the camp maps. The structure looked ancient, its wood weathered and warped by years of exposure. With trepidation, we entered the cabin. The sight that greeted us was horrifying. Jameson lay unconscious on the floor, bound with rope. The room was filled with strange symbols drawn on the walls and floor, their meanings unknown but undeniably sinister. As we rushed to untie Jameson and carry him to safety, a chilling realization settled over us. The events unfolding at Camp Silver Lake were far more terrifying than we could have imagined, and we were caught in the middle of a nightmare that was only beginning to unfold. The discovery of Jameson in the mysterious cabin marked a turning point in the unfolding events at Camp Silver Lake. Upon our return to the camp with the unconscious boy, we immediately contacted the authorities. The police response this time was swift and decisive, a stark contrast to the gradual wind-down of the search for Maddie. As Jameson was rushed to the hospital, the camp became a hive of activity. Police officers combed the grounds, forensic teams descended on the cabin in the woods, and anxious parents began arriving to collect their children. The camp director, in consultation with the authorities, made the difficult decision to shut down operations for the summer. In the midst of this chaos, I found myself unable to simply walk away. The mystery surrounding Maddie's disappearance and Jameson's abduction gnawed at me, demanding resolution. Evan and Cassidy, it turned out, felt the same way. As the last of the campers departed, we approached the camp director with a proposal to stay on and assist with the investigation. "I understand your concern," the director said, his face etched with worry lines. "But this is a matter for the professionals. It could be dangerous." "With all due respect, sir," I countered. "We know this camp better than anyone. We can provide valuable assistance to the investigation." After some deliberation, and with the cautious approval of the lead detective, we were allowed to stay. The once bustling camp now felt eerily empty, its silence broken only by the activities of the investigating officers. Our first order of business was to revisit the cabin where we had found Jameson. In the light of day, its ominous aura was somewhat diminished, but the sense of wrongness lingered. The police had finished their initial examination, but allowed us to look around under supervision. "What do you make of these symbols?" Cassidy asked, gesturing to the strange markings on the walls. Evan shook his head. "I've never seen anything like them. They don't look like any language I know." As we examined the cabin, a disturbing picture began to emerge. The symbols, while unfamiliar, seemed to be arranged in patterns. Some appeared repeatedly, while others were unique. It was clear that whoever had created them was following some sort of system or ritual. In one corner, we discovered a pile of personal effects. Among them was a backpack that we recognized as belonging to Maddie. The sight of it sent a chill through me. Whatever had happened to her, this cabin was undoubtedly connected. Over the next few days, we threw ourselves into the investigation. We pored over maps of the area, searching for any other structures or locations that might have escaped notice. We interviewed camp staff who had worked previous summers, hoping to uncover any strange occurrences or legends that might provide clues. One evening, as we sat in the main lodge reviewing our findings, Evan made a startling connection. "Look at this," he said, pointing to an old camp ledger. "There have been other disappearances over the years. They're not frequent, but every decade or so, someone goes missing from the camp or the surrounding area." This revelation added a new dimension to our investigation. Whatever was happening at Camp Silver Lake, it had roots that stretched back far longer than we had initially believed. As we delved deeper into the camp's history, we began to uncover whispers of local legends, stories of strange lights in the woods, of eerie sounds echoing across the lake at night, of hikers who ventured into the forest and never returned. These tales had always been dismissed as campfire stories, but in light of recent events, they took on a more sinister significance. Our breakthrough came when we received word that Jameson had regained consciousness in the hospital. The detective assigned to the case allowed us to accompany him for the interview, recognizing that a familiar face might help put the boy at ease. Jameson's account was fragmented and confused, but one detail stood out with chilling clarity. He spoke of a man with a distinctive scar on his face, a man who had taken him from his bed and brought him to the cabin in the woods. He kept talking about a ritual, Jameson said, his voice trembling, said he needed to complete the circle, whatever that means. As we left the hospital, the weight of this new information settled heavily upon us. We now had a face to associate with the horrors unfolding at Camp Silver Lake, the face of a scarred man, driven by some incomprehensible purpose. That night, as I lay in my bunk unable to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the verge of uncovering something far larger and more terrifying than we had initially imagined. The scarred man, the strange symbols, the history of disappearances, all pointed to a dark secret that had been festering in these woods for generations. As I finally drifted off to sleep, my dreams were plagued by visions of shadowy figures moving through the trees, of strange symbols glowing in the dark, and of a scarred face grinning with malevolent purpose. Little did I know that these nightmares were but a pale shadow of the horrors that awaited us in the coming days. Armed with the information from Jameson and our own research into the camp's history, we decided to take a more proactive approach in our investigation. After consulting with the lead detective, we formulated a plan to conduct nightly stakeouts around the camp, focusing particularly on the area near the mysterious cabin. We divided the night into shifts, each of us taking turns to watch for any unusual activity. The police provided us with walkie-talkies to maintain communication, and we were under strict instructions to alert them immediately if we spotted anything suspicious. The first few nights of our stakeout passed uneventfully. The forest was quiet save for the usual nocturnal sounds of wildlife. However, the lack of activity did little to ease the tension that had settled over us. If anything, the waiting only served to heighten our anxiety. It was on the fourth night of our vigil that things took a dramatic turn. I was on watch with Cassidy, positioned near the edge of the camp overlooking the path that led to the cabin. The night was unusually still, with a thin mist clinging to the ground, obscuring the forest floor. As midnight approached, a sound caught my attention, a faint rustling, distinct from the ambient noises of the forest. I signaled to Cassidy, and we both peered intently into the darkness. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. A shadow seemed to be moving through the trees, more fluid than any animal I had ever seen. As it drew closer, the shadow resolved into a human figure. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what I was seeing. The figure was tall and lean, moving with an unnatural grace through the undergrowth. But it was the face that sent a chill down my spine. Even in the dim moonlight, I could make out the distinctive scar that Jameson had described. "It's him," I whispered to Cassidy, my hand shaking as I reached for the walkie-talkie. "The scarred man." Before I could radio for backup, the figure stopped. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he had spotted us. But then I realized he was carrying something, or someone, over his shoulder. "He's got another victim," Cassidy hissed, her voice tight with fear and anger. I quickly relayed our position and what we had seen to Evan and the police. Then, driven by a mixture of adrenaline and a desperate need to prevent another tragedy, we made the decision to follow the scarred man. Moving as quietly as we could, we trailed the figure through the woods. The mist made it difficult to keep sight of him, and more than once we nearly lost his trail. But somehow, we managed to keep pace. After what seemed like an eternity of tense pursuit, the scarred man came to a stop in a small clearing. As he lowered his burden to the ground, I recognized the unconscious form of Steve, another counselor who had stayed behind to assist with the investigation. My mind raced as I tried to formulate a plan. We were unarmed, save for my pocket knife, Evan's baseball bat, and Cassidy's heavy-duty flashlight. The police were on their way, but I knew we couldn't wait for them to arrive. Every second counted. With a silent nod to my companions, we spread out to surround the clearing. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept forward, acutely aware of every twig and leaf beneath my feet. The scarred man seemed preoccupied with his unconscious captive, giving us a momentary advantage. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I made my move. In one swift motion, I pressed my pocket knife against the man's back, my voice low and steady as I spoke. "Don't move." The scarred man froze, his body tensing at the sudden threat. His voice when he spoke was low and gravelly, sending chills down my spine. "You don't know what you're getting into." Evan stepped forward, his baseball bat at the ready.
"Who are you? Why are you doing this?"
The man's response was chilling in its calm delivery. "Names don't matter. What matters is that you've interfered with something much bigger than you can comprehend." Cassidy, her flashlight gripped tightly, interjected with barely contained anger. "You're just a psychopath. This ends now." What happened next occurred with frightening speed. The scarred man moved with inhuman quickness, his elbow connecting with my stomach and knocking the wind out of me. Evan swung his bat, but the man ducked, wrenching the weapon from his grasp. Cassidy, reacting quickly, swung her flashlight. The heavy object connected with the man's head, causing him to stumble. Seizing the opportunity, I tackled him to the ground. We grappled in the dirt, his strength far exceeding what his lean frame suggested. Through sheer determination and the advantage of numbers, we managed to subdue him. Evan and Cassidy quickly bound his hands and feet with rope we had brought for our stakeout. As we caught our breath, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The police had arrived, drawn by our earlier radio call. The scarred man was taken into custody, and paramedics tended to the still unconscious Steve. In the days that followed, we hoped for answers. However, the scarred man remained stubbornly silent, refusing to divulge any information about his motives or the whereabouts of Maddie. The police investigation continued, but without further leads, it eventually stalled. The camp never reopened, the events of that summer casting a long shadow over its once idyllic reputation. For those of us who had lived through the ordeal, the scars ran deep, both physical and emotional. In the weeks and months following the capture of the scarred man, life took on a surreal quality. The events at Camp Silver Lake had shaken us to our core, leaving us grappling with questions that seemed to have no answers. The authorities conducted a thorough investigation, combing through every inch of the camp and the surrounding forest. Despite their efforts, no trace of Maddie was ever found. The symbols in the cabin were analyzed by experts, but their meaning remained elusive, adding another layer of mystery to the already perplexing case. The scarred man, identified through fingerprints as Jared Blackwood, had no prior criminal record. His background check revealed a disturbingly normal life up until a few years before the incidents at the camp. What had triggered his descent into madness and violence remained unclear. As summer faded into fall, we each tried to come to terms with what had happened in our own ways. I found myself plagued by nightmares, reliving the terrifying moments in the forest clearing. The sound of rustling leaves or an unexpected shadow was enough to send my heart racing. Evan threw himself into physical activities with even greater fervor than before, as if trying to outrun the memories. Cassidy turned to her art, producing dark, unsettling pieces that seemed to capture the essence of our shared trauma. We stayed in touch, bound by the experiences we had shared. Our conversations often circled back to that summer, each of us trying to make sense of what had happened. The unanswered questions gnawed at us, particularly the fate of Maddie and the true nature of Blackwood's motivations. As time passed, we gradually began to rebuild our lives. I enrolled in college as planned, though my chosen field of study shifted to psychology, driven by a desire to understand the human mind and perhaps gain some insight into the events we had experienced. 5 years after the events at Camp Silver Lake, I found myself back in the area, drawn by a mix of nostalgia and an unresolved need for closure. The camp itself remained abandoned, its buildings slowly reclaimed by nature. As I stood at the edge of the property, memories flooded back with startling clarity. The laughter of children, the crackling of campfires, the sense of camaraderie among the staff, all overshadowed by the terror that had unfolded here. During my visit, I met with local authorities to inquire about any developments in the case. While there had been no breakthroughs, they shared some unsettling information. Over the years, there had been sporadic reports of strange sightings in the woods surrounding the former camp. Glimpses of shadowy figures, unexplained lights, and eerie sounds echoing through the trees. These reports, while unsubstantiated, sent a chill down my spine. They hinted at the possibility that whatever dark forces had been at work during that fateful summer might still be active, lurking just beyond the edge of civilization. A decade after the Camp Silver Lake incident, Evan, Cassidy, and I reunited for a weekend getaway. As we sat around a campfire, notably far from any dense forests, the conversation inevitably turned to the events of that summer. Evan, now a physical education teacher, spoke of his ongoing struggles with hypervigilance. "I can't shake the feeling of being watched," he admitted, his eyes darting to the shadows beyond our circle of light. Cassidy, who had become a successful artist known for her evocative and slightly disturbing works, nodded in understanding. "I see his face sometimes," she said quietly. "The scarred man. In crowds, in my dreams. I know it's not real, but..." As we talked, we realized that each of us had been drawn to careers and lifestyles that in some way reflected our experiences. My work in psychology, Evan's focus on physical preparedness, Cassidy's exploration of darkness through art, all were in their own ways attempts to process and understand what we had been through. It was during this reunion that we made a startling discovery. In discussing our individual research into the history of the area, we found that the pattern of disappearances and strange occurrences stretched back much further than we had initially realized. Generations of locals had whispered about the curse of Silver Lake, a legend we had dismissed as campfire stories but now took on a more ominous significance. As our weekend came to a close, we made a pact. We would continue to investigate, to seek answers to the questions that had haunted us for so long, not out of a desire for adventure or closure, but out of a sense of responsibility to those who had been lost and to prevent future tragedies. In the years that followed, we maintained our connection, sharing any new information we uncovered. We created a network of contacts, local historians, paranormal researchers, and even a few sympathetic law enforcement officers, all dedicated to unraveling the mysteries surrounding Camp Silver Lake. While we never fully solved the puzzle, our efforts were not in vain. Our vigilance and willingness to speak out about our experiences led to increased awareness and safety measures in wilderness areas across the region. The legend of the scarred man became a cautionary tale, reminding people to remain alert and prepared in the great outdoors. As I reflect on the events of that summer, and the journey it set us on, I am struck by the resilience of the human spirit. We faced unimaginable horrors, yet we emerged not broken, but determined. The scars remain, both physical and emotional, but they serve as a reminder of our strength and the bonds forged in adversity. The mystery of Camp Silver Lake may never be fully resolved, but in our continued quest for answers, we honor the memory of those lost and stand guard against the darkness that lurks at the edges of our world. For in the face of the unknown, Vigilance is not just a choice, but a responsibility we all share. My name is Rufus Hennessy, and the events I'm about to recount occurred in 2011. At the time, I was employed as a police officer in Fairview, Nebraska, a small town where I was born and raised. Fairview is the quintessential American small town, where everyone knows their neighbors and the community spirit is strong. Prior to the incident I'm about to describe, I believed I had seen everything there was to see in our quiet corner of the world. However, one night changed my perspective entirely, altering the course of my life and the fabric of our community. I had been serving on the Fairview Police Force for approximately 15 years, having joined immediately after graduating high school. The decision to forego college and pursue a career in law enforcement was driven by my desire to make a tangible difference in my community. There was a certain comfort in the routine of small-town policing, the predictability of Mrs. Barlow's monthly calls about her missing cat, or Mr. Jenkins' attempts to pilfer a bottle of whiskey from the general store, more out of boredom than malice. On the night in question, I was stationed at the police department, working through a stack of paperwork and nursing my third cup of subpar coffee. The clock on the wall read 11 p.m., and the quiet of the night was broken only by the occasional crackle of the police radio and the hum of the ancient air conditioning unit. Suddenly the phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the silence. I answered promptly, recognizing the voice of Millie, our dispatcher. Her tone immediately put me on alert. Millie was typically unflappable, but now her voice trembled with barely contained panic. "Rufus, you need to get over to the old Miller place," she said, her words rushed and breathless. "What's the situation, Millie?" I inquired, already reaching for my jacket and car keys. "Just get over there, Rufus. It's bad," she replied cryptically before abruptly ending the call. The Miller property had been abandoned for several years following the death of its owner. The deceased's children had shown no interest in maintaining or selling the property, leaving it to fall into disrepair. Over time, it had become a popular spot for local teenagers to test their bravery, daring each other to spend the night in the decaying farmhouse. As I drove through the quiet streets of Fairview, my mind raced with possibilities. Millie's uncharacteristic behavior suggested that this was no ordinary call. The knot of apprehension in my stomach tightened as I approached the outskirts of town, where the Miller property was located. Turning onto the long, overgrown driveway, I immediately noticed something amiss. Despite the property's abandoned status, there were lights visible through the grimy windows of the farmhouse. The flickering quality of the illumination suggested candles or flashlights rather than functioning electricity. I brought my cruiser to a stop and radioed in my location to dispatch. As I exited the vehicle, the cool night air carried the scent of decaying wood and damp earth. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of gravel under my boots as I approached the house. Drawing my flashlight and sidearm, I cautiously made my way to the front porch. The wooden steps creaked ominously under my weight, and I noticed that the front door was slightly ajar, swaying gently in the night breeze. "Hello?" I called out, pushing the door open further with my foot. "This is the police. Is anyone here?" My voice echoed through the empty house, met only by silence. Steeling myself, I crossed the threshold, the floorboards groaning in protest. The flickering light I had observed from outside seemed to be emanating from the living room. As I turned the corner, the beam of my flashlight illuminated a scene that would haunt me for years to come. In the center of the room stood a makeshift altar, surrounded by candles whose flames cast eerie, dancing shadows on the walls. Atop the altar lay a sight that turned my blood to ice, the body of a young woman, bound and gagged, her lifeless eyes staring vacantly at the ceiling. As I approached, my training kicking in despite the horror of the situation, I checked for a pulse, knowing even as I did so that it was futile. The woman's skin was cool to the touch, indicating that she had been dead for some time. With shaking hands, I reached for my radio. "Millie, I need backup at the Miller place, now, and send an ambulance." I fought to keep my voice steady as I relayed the grim discovery. As I waited for backup to arrive, a sound from upstairs caught my attention. It was a subtle noise, barely perceptible, the sound of movement, of someone trying to remain undetected. Every instinct told me to wait for assistance, but a combination of duty and a burning need to understand what had transpired in this house propelled me towards the staircase. With my heart pounding in my chest and my weapon at the ready, I began to ascend the stairs, each step bringing me closer to a confrontation that would change my life forever. The second floor of the Miller house was in even worse condition than the first. Years of neglect had taken their toll, with peeling wallpaper and warped floorboards creating an atmosphere of decay and abandonment. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing closed doors lining a narrow hallway. The shuffling sound I had heard from downstairs was more pronounced now, emanating from behind one of the closed doors. I approached cautiously, my police training warring with the primal fear that threatened to overwhelm me. Positioning myself to the side of the door, I called out, "Police, come out with your hands up." My voice sounded unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence of the house. For a moment, there was no response. Then, slowly, the door began to creak open. I tightened my grip on my weapon, prepared for whatever might emerge. The figure that stepped out of the room was unlike anything I had encountered in my years of police work. It was a man, or at least it had once been a man. He stood unnaturally tall, his gaunt frame accentuated by tattered, dirty clothing. But it was his face that sent a chill down my spine, wild, sunken eyes that seemed to glow with an inner madness, and a rictus grin that stretched his features into a grotesque mask. In his hand, he clutched a long, wicked-looking knife. The blade gleamed dully in the beam of my flashlight, its edge stained with what I feared was blood. "Drop the knife," I commanded, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "Drop it now." The man's grin widened impossibly further, and a low, guttural sound emerged from his throat. Not quite a laugh, not quite a growl. Then, with a speed that belied his emaciated appearance, he lunged towards me. I fired my weapon, the sound of the gunshot deafening in the confined space of the hallway. The man staggered, the knife clattering to the floor before he crumpled in a heap at my feet. My heart pounding, I approached cautiously, kicking the knife away before checking for a pulse. There was none. The man was dead. As the adrenaline began to subside, I became aware of the sound of sirens in the distance. Backup was finally arriving. I made my way back downstairs, my mind reeling from the events of the past few minutes. The house was soon swarming with officers and crime scene technicians. The body of the young woman was carefully removed from the makeshift altar, and a thorough search of the premises began. As the senior officer on the scene, I oversaw the initial investigation. The woman was identified as Emily Larkin, a 22-year-old student at the local community college, who had been reported missing 2 days prior. The man I had shot was identified through fingerprints as David Halstead, a drifter with a history of mental illness and minor criminal offenses. As we combed through the house, more disturbing details emerged. In what appeared to be Halstead's living space, we discovered journals filled with rambling entries about dark rituals and sacrifices. The writings were barely coherent, filled with references to ancient gods and promises of power through bloodshed. Evidence suggested that Halstead had been squatting in the abandoned house for several weeks, possibly months. The room where I had encountered him was filled with occult paraphernalia, strange symbols drawn on the walls, crystals and bones arranged in patterns that made no sense to my rational mind. As dawn broke over Fairview, casting a pale light over the crime scene, I found myself standing on the front porch of the Miller house, trying to make sense of what had transpired. The events of the night had shaken me to my core, forcing me to confront the reality that evil could manifest even in the most unexpected places. Little did I know that this was only the beginning. The horror that had unfolded in the Miller house would cast a long shadow over our town, changing the fabric of our community and testing the limits of our resilience in ways we could never have imagined. The days following the gruesome discovery at the Miller house were a whirlwind of activity. Fairview, typically a town where the biggest news was the outcome of the high school football game, suddenly found itself thrust into the national spotlight. News vans from larger cities descended upon us, their satellite dishes and eager reporters an alien presence in our quiet streets. The story of Emily Larkin's murder and the subsequent confrontation with David Halstead spread quickly, first through local channels and then picked up by national media outlets. Our small police force was overwhelmed with inquiries from journalists and concerned citizens alike. As the lead officer on the case, much of the responsibility fell on my shoulders. I spent countless hours coordinating with state investigators, fielding questions from reporters, and trying to piece together the events that had led to this tragedy. The autopsy report on Emily Larkin painted a grim picture, She had been held captive for at least 36 hours before her death, subjected to torture and ritualistic markings. The cause of death was determined to be blood loss from multiple knife wounds, each carefully placed in a pattern that corresponded to the ramblings in Halstead's journals. The investigation into David Halstead's background revealed a troubled history. He had been in and out of mental health facilities for years, diagnosed with severe schizophrenia and delusional disorder. Somewhere along the line, he had fallen through the cracks of the system, his deteriorating mental state going unchecked as he drifted from town to town. As we delved deeper into Halstead's past, we discovered connections to various fringe groups and online forums dedicated to occult practices. It seemed that in his delusional state, he had cobbled together a belief system from bits and pieces of different mythologies and conspiracy theories, creating a twisted worldview that justified his horrific actions. The impact on our community was profound. Fairview had always prided itself on being a safe place, where people left their doors unlocked and children played freely in the streets. Now, an undercurrent of fear ran through the town. Parents kept a closer eye on their children, and neighbors viewed strangers with suspicion. The Larkin family was devastated. Emily had been well liked in the community, known for her kind heart and volunteer work at the local animal shelter. The memorial service held for her was attended by nearly the entire town, a somber affair that underscored the collective grief and shock we all felt. As for me, the events of that night had left an indelible mark. I found myself plagued by nightmares, reliving the moment I confronted Halstead, seeing Emily's lifeless eyes staring accusingly at me. During my waking hours, I was consumed by a sense of guilt. If only I had gotten there sooner. If only we had taken the missing persons report more seriously from the start. Maybe Emily would still be alive. Chief Anderson, recognizing the toll the case had taken on me, suggested I take some time off, but I couldn't bring myself to step away. I threw myself into work with renewed vigor, determined to ensure that nothing like this would ever happen in Fairview again. We implemented new protocols for missing persons cases, increased patrols around abandoned properties, and worked to establish better communication channels with mental health services in neighboring counties. It wasn't much, but it felt like a start. As the weeks passed and the media attention began to wane, Fairview slowly tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the scars remained, visible in the wary glances of passers-by and the new security systems being installed on homes throughout the town. One evening, as I was leaving the station after another long day, I found myself driving past the Miller property. The house stood dark and silent, crime scene tape still fluttering in the breeze. In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could work to prevent it from happening again. I would dedicate myself to protecting Fairview, to being the guardian our town needed in these dark times. Little did I know that this commitment would be tested sooner than I could have imagined, as the echoes of Halstead's madness continued to reverberate through our community. In the months following the tragedy at the Miller house, Fairview struggled to regain its footing. The initial shock had worn off, but a pervasive sense of unease lingered in the air. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing the potential for darkness that had always existed beneath the surface of our idyllic small-town life. As summer turned to fall, strange occurrences began to plague the town. It started small. Reports of vandalism at the local cemetery, strange symbols carved into trees at the edge of town, whispers of shadowy figures seen lurking near abandoned buildings at night. At first, we dismissed these incidents as the work of pranksters or overactive imaginations fueled by the recent tragedy. But as Halloween approached, things took a more sinister turn. A group of teenagers, inspired by the morbid fascination surrounding the Miller house, decided to break in for a night of ghost hunting. What they found inside sent them running in terror. Fresh candles arranged in bizarre patterns, and walls newly adorned with the same type of symbols found in Halstead's journals. When I arrived at the scene, my blood ran cold. The symbols were an exact match to those we had documented months ago, drawn with the same frenzied precision. But David Halstead was dead. I had seen to that myself, which meant that someone else was continuing his work. A thorough search of the property revealed no physical evidence of an intruder, but the implications were clear. Halstead's madness had spread beyond his death, infecting others with its toxic ideology. As news of this development spread through town, the fear that had begun to subside reignited with a vengeance. Parents kept their children home from school. Businesses closed early, and a self-imposed curfew fell over Fairview. The carefree spirit that had once defined our community was replaced by a cloud of suspicion and paranoia. In response to the growing crisis, I called a town meeting at the community center. The large hall was packed to capacity, filled with concerned citizens looking for answers and reassurance. As I stood at the podium facing the sea of worried faces, I felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. "I know you're all scared," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. What happened to Emily Larkin was a tragedy, one that shook us all to our core. And now with these new incidents, it's natural to feel afraid. But we cannot let fear control us. We cannot let the actions of one disturbed individual, or those who might seek to emulate him, destroy the community we've built together. I outlined the steps we were taking to increase security and investigate the recent occurrences. I emphasized the importance of community vigilance, urging people to report any suspicious activity without falling into the trap of baseless accusations or hysteria. As the meeting concluded, I could sense a shift in the atmosphere. There was still fear, yes, but also a renewed sense of determination. Fairview had been knocked down, but we were not out. We would face this threat together as a community. In the weeks that followed, we saw an increase in neighborhood watch participation and a stronger sense of cooperation between the police force and the citizens we served. People began to look out for one another more actively, checking in on elderly neighbors and organizing community events to maintain a sense of normalcy. But even as Fairview rallied, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial. The incidents at the Miller house felt like more than just copycat actions or misguided pranks. There was a deliberateness to them, a purpose that eluded my understanding. Late one night, as I pored over the case files for the 100th time, a detail caught my eye. In one of Halstead's journals, he had made repeated references to a circle and chosen ones who would carry on his work. At the time, we had dismissed it as the ramblings of a deranged mind. But now, in light of recent events, I began to wonder if there was more to. As I delved deeper into Halstead's writings, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. His references to a circle and chosen ones were more frequent and detailed than we had initially realized. It appeared that Halstead believed he was part of a larger group, tasked with preparing for some sort of apocalyptic event. This revelation cast the recent incidents in a new light. If Halstead had indeed been part of a larger organization, it was possible that other members were continuing his work. The implications were chilling. We might be dealing with a coordinated group rather than isolated copycats. I shared my findings with Chief Anderson, who agreed that this new information warranted a deeper investigation. We decided to reach out to the state police and the FBI for assistance, recognizing that this situation might be beyond the capabilities of our small-town force. As we waited for additional resources to arrive, we increased patrols around town, paying special attention to abandoned properties and areas where the strange symbols had been found. The citizens of Fairview, while still on edge, rallied to support these efforts. Neighborhood watch groups coordinated with our officers, providing extra eyes and ears on the ground. Despite these precautions, the unsettling incidents continued. More symbols appeared around town, always in locations that were difficult to monitor. Anonymous tips began to come in, speaking of shadowy gatherings in the woods outside of town. Each new development added to the growing sense of unease that permeated Fairview. With the arrival of state police and FBI resources, our investigation took on a new level of intensity. Agents combed through Halstead's personal effects, analyzed his online activities, and began to piece together a network of contacts that stretched far beyond the borders of our small town. As the lead local officer on the case, I found myself working closely with FBI agent Sarah Reeves. Agent Reeves was a no-nonsense professional with a background in cult activity and fringe religious groups. Her expertise proved invaluable as we delved deeper into the twisted ideology that had driven Halstead. Based on what we've uncovered, Agent Reeves explained during one of our briefings, it appears that Halstead was involved with a loosely organized group that calls itself the Circle of the Eternal Night. They believe in hastening the arrival of some sort of cosmic entity through ritual sacrifice and the creation of what they call nodes of power. The more we learned about this group, the more concerned I became. It seemed that the Miller House incident, as horrific as it was, might have been just the beginning of their plans for Fairview. Our breakthrough came when we managed to identify one of Halstead's online contacts, a local man named Michael Thornton. Thornton had a history of mental health issues and had been in and out of treatment facilities over the years. More importantly, he had been seen in the vicinity of several locations where the strange symbols had appeared. We obtained a warrant to search Thornton's residence, a small apartment on the outskirts of town. What we found there confirmed our worst fears. The walls were covered in the same symbols we had found at the Miller house, and we discovered journals that mirrored Halstead's writings in their fervor and delusion. But Thornton himself was nowhere to be found. It appeared he had fled shortly before our arrival, tipped off perhaps by some unknown source. This development added a new urgency to our investigation. We now had a name and a face to pursue, but also the knowledge that our quarry was aware of our interest. As we expanded our search for Thornton, we also focused on identifying other potential members of the circle. This proved to be a challenging task, as the group operated with a high degree of secrecy and paranoia. However, bit by bit, we began to uncover a network that stretched throughout the region, with Fairview as its epicenter. The citizens of Fairview, already on edge from the previous incidents, reacted to these new developments with a mixture of fear and determination. Many volunteered to assist in the search for Thornton, while others worked to support the law enforcement efforts in any way they could. As the investigation progressed, I found myself working long hours, often late into the night. The case had become more than just a professional obligation, it was personal. I felt a deep responsibility to the people of Fairview, a need to protect them from the darkness that threatened to engulf our town. Little did I know that our efforts were about to come to a head in a confrontation that would test the limits of our resolve, and forever change the face of Fairview. Our search for Michael Thornton and other members of the Circle of the Eternal Night came to a dramatic climax on a cold November night. An anonymous tip led us to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, where a gathering of the group was supposedly taking place. As we approached the location, the tension was palpable. A joint task force of local police, state troopers, and FBI agents had been assembled for the operation. The warehouse loomed before us, a hulking silhouette against the night sky. Agent Reeves and I led one of the entry teams. As we breached the main entrance, the scene that greeted us was like something out of a nightmare. The interior of the warehouse had been transformed into a macabre temple, with strange symbols covering the walls and floor. Candles flickered in intricate patterns, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. In the center of this grotesque display stood Michael Thornton, surrounded by a group of robed figures. They were in the midst of some sort of ritual, their chanting rising to a fever pitch as we entered. "FBI, everybody freeze," Agent Reeves shouted, her voice cutting through the chanting. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. Then, chaos erupted. Some of the cultists attempted to flee, while others, including Thornton, turned to confront us. The ensuing struggle was intense, but mercifully brief. Our superior numbers and training quickly overwhelmed the cultists. As the dust settled and we began to process the scene, the true scope of what we had uncovered became clear. Documents found at the site revealed plans for a series of ritual killings, intended to create a network of power nodes throughout the region. Fairview, it seemed, was to be the epicenter of this dark design. The interrogations that followed painted a picture of a group driven by a mixture of mental illness, desperation, and a twisted ideology that promised power and purpose to its adherents. Many of the cultists were local residents, people I had known for years. The realization that this darkness had taken root so close to home was deeply unsettling. In the days following the raid, Fairview was once again thrust into the national spotlight. The exposure of a cult operating in the heart of small-town America captured the public imagination, bringing a fresh wave of media attention and curiosity seekers to our community. The aftermath of the cult's exposure and the subsequent arrests left Fairview reeling. The knowledge that friends and neighbors had been involved in such dark activities shook the foundations of trust within the community. People looked at each other with new eyes, wondering who else might be hiding terrible secrets. As the legal proceedings began, I found myself spending long hours testifying and assisting in the prosecution of the cult members. The trials were a grueling process, forcing us to relive the horrors we had uncovered and confront the human cost of the cult's activities. Throughout this period, I struggled with my own feelings of guilt and responsibility. Could I have done more to prevent this? Should I have seen the signs earlier? These questions haunted me, even as I worked to help the community heal. The recovery process for Fairview was slow and painful. Support groups were formed for those affected by the cult's activities, including family members of the arrested cultists. The town held numerous community meetings and events aimed at rebuilding trust and a sense of security. As the months passed, I noticed a gradual shift in the town's atmosphere. The initial fear and suspicion began to give way to a renewed sense of community spirit. People seemed more aware of their neighbors, more willing to reach out and offer support to those in need. 5 years have passed since the events that shook Fairview to its core. In that time, our town has undergone a profound transformation. The scars remain, but they have become a part of our shared history, a reminder of the darkness we faced and overcame together. I have since been promoted to Chief of Police, a position that allows me to continue working to protect and serve the community I love. The experiences we went through have shaped my approach to law enforcement, emphasizing the importance of community engagement and mental health awareness. Fairview itself has become something of a case study in community resilience. Researchers and law enforcement professionals from around the country have visited to learn from our experiences and the measures we've put in place to prevent similar incidents in the future. As I reflect on the events of that fateful year, I am struck by the complexity of human nature, its capacity for both great evil and tremendous good. The cult members, driven by delusion and desperation, caused immeasurable harm. But the response of the community, the way people came together to support one another and rebuild, revealed the inherent strength and goodness that exists within us all. The Miller House, once a symbol of the terror that gripped our town, has been demolished. In its place stands a community garden, a place of growth and renewal. It serves as a fitting metaphor for Fairview itself. From the ashes of tragedy, we have cultivated new life and hope. As I walk the streets of Fairview today, I see a town forever changed but not defeated. We carry the memory of those dark days with us, but we do not let it define us. Instead, we have chosen to learn from our past and use that knowledge to build a stronger, more compassionate community. The events of 2011 taught us that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places, but they also showed us the power of unity and resilience. As long as we remain vigilant, support one another, and face our challenges together, I believe that Fairview, and communities like it across the country, can withstand whatever darkness may come. In the end, this is not just a story about a crime or a cult. It's a story about a town that looked into the abyss and emerged stronger for it. It's a testament to the enduring spirit of community and the fundamental goodness that exists within us all. And it's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is always hope for a brighter tomorrow. The year 2020 had been merciless. By late October, I had grown weary of the isolation, the constant stream of bad news, and the disappointment that followed the cancellation of every significant milestone that should have marked my senior year. Our graduation ceremony, reduced to a drive-through event where we collected our diplomas through car windows while wearing masks, felt like the final insult. Some of my classmates didn't even participate in the online classes, meaning they didn't graduate at all. The pandemic had stolen something irreplaceable from us. As Halloween approached, I found myself staring at my bedroom ceiling, scrolling through old photos from previous celebrations. The idea formed gradually. What if we could reclaim some normalcy, even for just one night? I knew it was against regulations. The social distancing mandates were clear. But after months of compliance and sacrifice, my patience had worn thin. We needed this. My apartment wasn't suitable. The last party I'd hosted resulted in several valuable items disappearing. I needed a different location, somewhere isolated enough to avoid complaints, but comfortable enough to host a small group. I opened Discord and messaged my closest friends about potential venues. My girlfriend Leanne immediately responded with enthusiasm, but had no suggestions. It was her friend Sam who offered the solution during our video call later that evening. "What about that cabin your third cousin owns?" Sam suggested, her face illuminated by blue screen light. "The one in the pine forest?" "Why are you so interested?" I asked, surprised by her eagerness. Sam's expression brightened. "Think about it. It's Halloween, a blue moon, on a Saturday, during the weirdest year of our lives. Plus, I finally got time off work. It's perfect." She made compelling points. My third cousin Lance had moved to California months ago for a teaching position, leaving his remote property vacant except for occasional visits from his husband Francis. The cabin sat on nearly 6 acres of woodland, far enough from neighbors to avoid noise complaints. I sent Francis a message asking for permission, not expecting a quick response. To my surprise, he replied within minutes. Sure, just don't trash the place, and no alcohol. The latter stipulation made me hesitate. What's a Halloween party without drinks? But I sent back my agreement anyway. With location secured, I created a group chat with the invitation details. I kept the list small. Cameron, who'd been my friend since middle school. Adam, who I knew from my computer science classes. Leanne, my girlfriend of 2 years. And Sam, who had become part of our circle through Leanne. 5 people total, small enough to be relatively safe, large enough to feel like a real celebration. The responses came quickly. Everyone was in. As I made preparations over the next few days, I couldn't shake a persistent uneasiness. The last time I'd visited Lance's cabin 2 years ago, I'd experienced something disturbing in those woods. Something I'd tried to rationalize away, but never quite could. I hadn't told many people about it, certainly not in detail. Only Leanne knew the full story, though I'd mentioned it vaguely to the others. Would returning there be tempting fate? I pushed the thought aside. Whatever I'd seen or thought I'd seen before was probably just wildlife, my imagination enhanced by darkness and solitude. With friends around, there would be nothing to fear. How catastrophically wrong I would prove to be. The drive to the cabin took just under 2 hours, winding through increasingly remote countryside as suburban developments gave way to scattered farms, then to dense woodland. Cell service became spotty 15 minutes before I reached my destination, and I made mental note to warn the others. I arrived first, as planned, to prepare the space. The cabin sat nestled among towering pines, its weathered exterior blending seamlessly with the surrounding forest. A wraparound porch circled the structure, and large windows reflected the afternoon sunlight. Despite its rustic charm, the isolation struck me immediately. The nearest neighbor was at least 2 miles away. The gravel driveway crunched under my tires as I parked. When I cut the engine, the silence was complete. No traffic noise, no distant conversations, not even the ambient hum of electricity that forms the background soundtrack of urban life. Just the occasional whisper of wind through pine needles and the calls of birds I couldn't identify. I retrieved the key from beneath a false rock in the garden, just where Francis had said it would be, and entered the cabin. The door hinges protested with a drawn-out creak that seemed to echo through the silent rooms. The air inside smelled of wood and dust, with undertones of the pine forest that surrounded us. The main living area featured a stone fireplace, flanked by bookshelves filled with outdated field guides and dog-eared paperbacks. A large sectional sofa faced the fireplace, and a wooden dining table with 6 chairs occupied the adjacent space. The kitchen, though small, was well equipped, and a hallway led to 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. I began unloading supplies from my car, snacks, decorations, sodas, and, despite my promise to Francis, a significant quantity of alcohol hidden in innocent-looking grocery bags. As I arranged everything, I continued to feel a strange disquiet. The cabin seemed to absorb sound in a way that made every footstep, every movement, feel muffled and distant. Outside, the afternoon light was already beginning to fade. October days were short this far north, and the tall pines surrounding the property accelerated the transition to darkness. I turned on every light in the cabin, pushing back against the growing shadows. I unpacked my steampunk plague doctor costume, a full-face leather mask with glass eye lenses and an extended beak, a black wide-brimmed hat, a long coat, and gloves. I had ordered it months ago as a darkly ironic nod to the pandemic. As I laid it out on my bed, I caught a glimpse of movement through the bedroom window. I approached the glass and peered out into the growing gloom. Nothing moved in the tree line, at least nothing I could see. Yet the sense of being observed persisted, raising goosebumps on my arms despite the cabin's warmth. I quickly stepped away from the window and continued my preparations, attributing the sensation to memories of my previous experience here. By the time I finished setting up, the forest had been swallowed by darkness except where the cabin's exterior lights carved yellow pools into the night. The party decorations, fake cobwebs, plastic skeletons, and battery-operated candles transformed the rustic interior into something appropriately spooky yet inviting. A text message notification broke the silence. Cameron was 20 minutes away. The others would arrive shortly thereafter. I took a deep breath, put on some music to fill the unsettling quiet, and tried to focus on the celebration ahead, rather than the darkness pressing against the windows, and the persistent feeling that something waited beyond the light's reach. The sound of tires on gravel announced Cameron's arrival. I stepped onto the porch as his headlights swept across the front of the cabin, briefly illuminating the surrounding trees. He emerged from his car wearing one of those LED purge masks that had become popular in recent years, the eerie blue glow distorting his features. "Nice place," he said, removing the mask as he approached. "Isolated enough that no one will call the cops on us." He handed me a six-pack of hard cider. "Brought provisions." "Perfect," I said, helping him unload more drinks from his trunk. "The others should be here soon." We had barely finished storing the alcohol when Leanne's car appeared on the winding driveway. She stepped out wearing her Little Red Riding Hood costume, a modernized version with a short red dress, knee-high boots, and a hooded cape that fell to her waist. "Very appropriate for the woods," I noted as I embraced her. "I thought so," she replied, looking around at our surroundings. "Though maybe not the most comfortable choice for running from predators." I laughed, but her words sent an involuntary shiver through me. "Let's hope you won't need to." Sam arrived 15 minutes later in a car she'd borrowed from her parents. Her anime Catgirl costume, complete with ears, tail, and painted whiskers, seemed jarringly childish compared to the imposing darkness of the forest around us. "This place is amazing," she exclaimed, spinning in a circle to take in the cabin and surrounding woods. "Exactly how I imagined it from your descriptions." Adam was the last to arrive, pulling up in his pickup truck just after sunset. His zombie soldier costume was impressively detailed, with tattered military fatigues and professionally applied makeup that made his skin appear decayed. He carried a duffel bag over his shoulder that seemed unusually heavy. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "Got lost twice. GPS is useless out here." With everyone present, the party properly began. We gathered in the living room where I had set up a makeshift bar on a side table. Cameron connected his phone to the portable speaker I'd brought, filling the cabin with music. The combination of alcohol, familiar company, and the isolation from the outside world created a bubble of normalcy that we had all been craving. As the evening progressed, we played drinking games, shared stories, and allowed ourselves to forget temporarily about the chaos of the outside world. By midnight, we had transitioned to watching horror movies on the laptop I'd brought along, the fictional scares providing a comfortable distance from real-world anxieties. During a break between films, Sam turned to me with curious eyes. "So, Javier, you never really told us the full story about what happened to you here before." The room grew quieter as the others tuned in. I took a long sip of my drink, considering how much to share. The alcohol had loosened my inhibitions enough that the experience no longer seemed too embarrassing to discuss. "It was 2 years ago," I began. "Lance invited me up here to help him install some new fixtures. I stayed an extra day after he left to do some hiking. I was completely alone." "That's already a horror movie setup," Cameron interjected. I nodded. It was getting dark and I was heading back to the cabin when I heard something following me on the trail. At first I thought it was a deer or maybe a coyote. "But it wasn't?" Leanne prompted, though she already knew the story. "No. Whatever was following me was big. When I stopped walking, it stopped too. When I moved, it moved. It was mimicking me, stalking me." The memory sent another wave of discomfort through me. I finally caught a glimpse of it between the trees. It was tall, at least 6 feet, moving on all fours with a strange, fluid motion that didn't look natural. "Like a bear?" Adam suggested. "Bears don't stalk people like that," I said. "And it had a long snout and tail. In the dark, with just my flashlight, it looked..." I hesitated. "Like a werewolf," Sam finished for me, her eyes wide with excitement rather than fear. "I know how it sounds," I said defensively. "I was alone. It was dark, and I was scared. But I know I saw something." "Did you report it?" Adam asked. "To who? The forest ranger?" "Excuse me, I'd like to report a werewolf sighting." I shook my head. I convinced myself it was just a wolf or a coyote, maybe a mountain lion, and my imagination filled in the rest. "But you don't really believe that," Sam pressed. I met her gaze. "I don't know what I saw," I admitted. "But whatever it wasn't a normal animal." The conversation shifted to other topics as we started the next movie, but I noticed Sam's thoughtful expression. She kept glancing toward the windows, where our reflections were superimposed over the impenetrable darkness outside. The horror movie marathon continued past 2 a.m., our nerves frayed by fictional terrors while real darkness pressed against the cabin windows. We had progressed from beer and cider to stronger drinks, and the combination of alcohol and adrenaline from jump scares had created a peculiar atmosphere, half giddy, half tense. During a particularly gruesome scene in the third Saw film, Sam abruptly stood up. "I need some air," she announced, stretching dramatically. "There's plenty of it on the porch," I suggested, not taking my eyes off the screen. "No, I mean real air. Forest air." She moved toward the door, grabbing her jacket. "Plus, it's a blue moon on Halloween. When else will I get a chance to experience that?" Leanne sat forward. "You're not going out there alone, are you?" "It's just woods," Sam replied with exaggerated casualness that didn't quite mask her excitement. "Besides, I want to see if I can spot Javier's werewolf." I turned to her then, alarmed by the recklessness in her voice. "That's a terrible idea. It's past 2 in the morning, we've been drinking, and it's easy to get lost out there." "I'm not going far," she insisted, "just down the driveway a bit." "The last time I was here," I said firmly, "I encountered something dangerous. I wasn't making that up for entertainment." Sam rolled her eyes. "It was probably just a big dog." "It wasn't a dog." My voice came out sharper than intended. "Look, if you want to go wandering around in the dark forest by yourself, be my guest. But if you get attacked or lost, don't expect me to come running after you." I had hoped to scare her into staying, but Sam's expression only brightened with challenge. "Fine. I'll be back in 15 minutes. With that, she slipped out the door before anyone could stop her. We returned our attention to the movie, but my focus was broken. Every few minutes I glanced toward the door, expecting Sam to return with her adventure aborted. When 10 minutes passed with no sign of her, uneasiness began to build in my stomach. "She should have been back by now," Leanne said, voicing my concerns. She moved to the window, trying to peer into the darkness. "I can't see anything out there." "She's probably just trying to scare us," Cameron suggested, but his tone lacked conviction. Another 5 minutes passed, then 10. The movie ended, and still no Sam. "Something's wrong," Leanne said, reaching for her jacket. "We need to find her." Cameron nodded in agreement, already pulling on his shoes. Adam looked uncomfortable. "Maybe I should stay here in case she comes back." Under normal circumstances, I might have accused him of cowardice, but his suggestion was practical. "Good idea. If we all go searching and she returns to an empty cabin, she'll think we abandoned her." "Take this," Adam said, reaching into his duffel bag and pulling out a hunting rifle that instantly silenced the room. "Why did you bring that?" I asked, startled. "I always bring protection when I go to remote areas," he replied with a shrug, "but I think you should take it." I hesitated before declining. "No, you keep it here. We'll take flashlights." I didn't mention that my hands were shaking too much to trust myself with a firearm. We gathered our flashlights and cell phones, though I warned that reception was non-existent beyond the clearing. I put on my plague doctor mask for warmth. Its leather would shield my face from branches, while Cameron donned his purge mask with its built-in light. Leanne pulled up her red hood. Before stepping outside, I turned to Adam. "If we're not back in an hour, call for help." I didn't specify what kind of help might be available in these remote woods, and he didn't ask. The night air hit us with shocking coldness after the cabin's warmth. Our breath formed clouds in the beam of our flashlights. The moon, full and tinged slightly blue as promised, provided minimal illumination through the dense canopy. "Sam!" Leanne called, her voice seeming small against the vastness of the forest. We moved down the gravel driveway, calling periodically and sweeping our lights across the underbrush. The further we went from the cabin, the more oppressive the silence became, broken only by our footsteps and calls. The forest seemed to absorb sound in an unnatural way, as if it were listening, waiting. "I don't like this," Cameron muttered after we'd walked about a quarter mile. Neither did I, but I kept that thought to myself. Instead, I focused on scanning the woods for any sign of movement, any flash of Sam's reflective costume elements. Then I heard it, a soft rustling to our right, just beyond the reach of our flashlights. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, directing my flashlight toward the sound. Cameron nodded, the blue glow of his mask making his gesture ghostly. "Could be Sam." "Sam!" Leanne called again, louder this time. "This isn't funny anymore." No response came, but the rustling continued, moving parallel to us. Something was keeping pace with our progress down the road. I fought the rising panic in my chest, focusing instead on rational explanations. Wind in the branches, a raccoon or a possum, perhaps a deer watching us cautiously from the safety of the trees. But when we stopped walking, the rustling stopped too, just as it had 2 years ago. "Turn off your flashlights," I instructed, my voice tight. "What? Why would we—" Cameron began. "Just do it," I insisted. "Trust me." Reluctantly, they complied. The darkness that engulfed us was absolute. The moon, despite being full, provided little illumination through the dense canopy of pine branches overhead. As my eyes adjusted, I could barely make out Leanne's silhouette beside me. We stood in silence for nearly a minute. My ears strained against the quiet, picking up the soft whisper of wind, the distant call of a night bird, and our own breathing, too loud in the stillness. Then I heard it. The deliberate sound of movement in the underbrush, drawing closer. Whatever was there had been waiting for us to resume walking. Now it was approaching on its own. "Turn them back on," I said urgently. "Now!" Our lights came on simultaneously, beams sweeping frantically toward the sound. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of something retreating into the deeper shadows. Something low to the ground, but substantial, moving with unsettling speed and purpose. "What was that?" Leanne's voice trembled slightly. Before I could answer, a scream tore through the night. Human, female, and terrified. It came from somewhere ahead of us, deeper into the woods beyond the road. "Sam!" Leanne bolted toward the sound, her red cape fluttering behind her like a warning flag. "Wait!" I called, but she was already plunging into the trees. Cameron and I had no choice but to follow, our flashlights bouncing wildly as we ran, creating a disorienting strobe effect among the pines. We crashed through underbrush, guided only by Leanne's bobbing flashlight ahead and the direction from which we'd heard the scream. Branches clawed at our clothes, roots threatened to trip us with every step, and the darkness seemed to push against us with physical force. "Leanne, slow down," I called, gasping for breath. The plague doctor mask made breathing difficult as I ran, but I dared not remove it. The glass eye lenses were the only thing protecting my vision from whipping branches. Suddenly, Leanne's light stopped moving. We caught up to find her standing rigid, her beam fixed on a small clearing ahead. In the center stood Sam, her costume torn and dirty, her painted whiskers smeared by tears or sweat. "Sam, thank God!" Leanne rushed forward to embrace her friend. But Sam didn't move to meet her. She remained frozen, staring not at us but at something beyond the clearing's edge. "We need to go," Sam said, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Now, right now." "What happened?" I approached cautiously, scanning the trees behind her. "Did you fall? Are you hurt?" "I saw it," she said, finally looking at me. "I saw what you saw before. It's real, Javier, and it's not alone." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. They're circling us." As if confirming her words, a low growl emerged from the darkness to our left. It was joined by another from behind us, then a third from the right. The sounds were unlike anything I'd heard before. Not quite wolf, not quite bear, carrying harmonics that seemed almost human yet fundamentally wrong. We instinctively moved closer together, forming a tight cluster with our flashlights pointing outward. In the narrow beams I caught brief glimpses of movement, dark shapes flowing between trees with disturbing grace, always just at the edge of visibility. "What do they want?" Cameron's voice cracked with fear. "Us," Sam replied simply. "They've been herding us deeper into the woods, away from the road." The realization hit me with terrifying clarity. We had been manipulated, drawn away from safety by creatures that displayed unmistakable intelligence and coordination. These were not mindless animals, but predators with strategy. "We need to get back to the cabin," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Stay together. Move slowly toward the road. Don't run. That's what they want." As we began to edge backward, one of the creatures moved into the periphery of my flashlight beam. My throat constricted at the sight. A massive form, powerfully built, moving on all fours yet with a fluidity that suggested it could rise to 2 legs if it chose. Its eyes reflected the light back at me, glowing with eerie intelligence. Then it was gone, melting into the shadows before I could process more details. "They're getting closer," Leanne whispered, her hand finding mine in the darkness. The growls intensified, now coming from all directions. We were surrounded. Our flashlights, once seeming powerful against the night, now revealed only tantalizing glimpses of our stalkers, never enough to fully comprehend what we were facing. "On 3, I said, my decision made. "We run, straight through the gap between those 2 pines. Ready? 1, 2... The world exploded with sound before I could say 3. The thunderous crack of a gunshot reverberated through the forest, temporarily silencing everything, the growls, the rustling, even the night insects. We froze, startled by the unexpected intervention. A second shot followed, this one closer, deliberately fired into the air rather than at any target. The sound came from the direction of the road, where a flashlight beam stronger than ours now swept through the trees. "Javier! Leanne!" Adam's voice called out. "Cameron! Sam! Where are you?" "Here!" We shouted in unison, our voices breaking with relief. The growls resumed, but more distant now, retreating from the new threat. We took advantage of the distraction, moving quickly toward Adam's voice and light. When we emerged onto the gravel road, I nearly collapsed with relief. Adam stood there, rifle held competently against his shoulder, scanning the tree line. "I heard screaming," he explained, not taking his eyes from the forest. "When you didn't come back, I got worried." "Thank God you came," Cameron said, bending over with his hands on his knees as he caught his breath. "What were those things?" Leanne asked, her arm protectively around Sam's shoulders. Adam finally looked at us. I only got a glimpse. Big, definitely predators. Wolves, maybe? But his expression betrayed doubt. "Not wolves," Sam said firmly. "Not like any animal I've ever seen." We hurried back toward the cabin, Adam taking the rear position with his rifle ready. The walk seemed twice as long as before, each shadow potentially concealing another creature. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being allowed to retreat, that the gunshots had merely interrupted rather than ended our encounter. The cabin's lights were a beacon of safety in the oppressive darkness. We rushed inside, locking the door behind us with hands that couldn't seem to stop shaking. In the harsh interior light, I could see the physical evidence of our ordeal. Scratches on exposed skin, torn clothing, pine needles and dirt clinging to us. Sam looked the worst, her costume ripped in multiple places, a long scratch across her forearm that was just beginning to bead with blood. Leanne led her to the bathroom to clean the wound while Cameron collapsed onto the sofa, pulling off his mask to reveal a face pale with lingering fear. "What happened out there?" Adam asked, setting his rifle carefully on the dining table before checking the windows to ensure they were securely locked. I removed my plague doctor mask, grateful to breathe freely again. "Sam went missing. We went looking for her. Something found us instead. Multiple somethings." "I went out to look for the creature Javier had seen before," Sam called from the bathroom. "I thought it was just a story. I didn't believe—" Her voice caught. "She found them," Leanne continued, emerging with antibiotic ointment and bandages. "Or they found her." "I was walking along the road," Sam said, returning to the living room with her arm freshly bandaged. "Just enjoying the night air, looking at the moon. Then I heard something following me. When I turned around, nothing was there. But when I started walking again, I could hear it keeping pace with me." Her account matched my experience from 2 years ago with disturbing precision. I tried to head back, but I got disoriented. Then I saw eyes reflecting my flashlight, too high off the ground for a normal animal. I panicked and ran into the woods, which was stupid, I know. She looked down at her hands. They could have caught me if they wanted to. They were toying with me, hurting me deeper in. "Wolves don't behave like that," Adam said, frowning. "These weren't wolves," I replied. "Not ordinary ones, anyway." Leanne gave me a warning look. "Let's not jump to supernatural conclusions." "I'm not saying they were werewolves," I clarified, though the thought had certainly crossed my mind. "But they weren't normal wildlife either. They displayed coordinated hunting tactics, intelligence." "Wolves hunt in packs," Cameron offered weakly. "Not like this," Sam insisted. "They were communicating, planning. One would drive me in a specific direction, then another would appear ahead to redirect me. They could have taken me down at any point, but they were leading me somewhere." A heavy silence fell over the room as we considered the implications. Outside, the wind had picked up, branches scraping against the cabin's exterior like fingernails on wood. "Could they have been people?" Leanne suggested. "Some kind of sick hunting game?" "No person moves like that," I said firmly. "And the sounds they made, those weren't human." Adam checked his watch. "It's almost 4 in the morning. We should try to get some rest. I'll take first watch." "Watch?" Cameron repeated. "You think they might try to get in?" Adam gestured toward the window. "I think whatever's out there isn't finished with us. Better safe than sorry." I moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The yard appeared empty, illuminated only by the porch light and security floodlight at the corner of the cabin, Beyond that, the forest was an impenetrable wall of shadow. But as I watched, I caught a flicker of movement at the tree line. Something large shifting position, watching the cabin. Then another movement to its right, and another to the left. They were still out there, surrounding us. Waiting. We established a rotation of lookouts. Adam first, then me, followed by Cameron, with the women exempt due to Sam's injury and Leanne's insistence on tending to her. I tried to sleep during my off hours, but managed only a fitful doze punctuated by startling awake at every creak of the cabin's timbers. When Adam woke me for my shift at 5:30 a.m., the first hints of dawn had begun to lighten the eastern sky. I took up position in the living room, rifle across my lap as Adam had shown me how to hold it. I had never fired a gun before, but Adam had given me basic instructions. Safety off, aim, squeeze the trigger gradually rather than pulling it suddenly. The pre-dawn hours passed with excruciating slowness. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound outside potentially signaling an approach. Twice I rose to check the windows, convinced I had seen movement, only to find nothing definitive, just the forest, gradually becoming visible as darkness retreated. By 7 a.m., sunlight filtered through the trees, revealing a landscape transformed by morning frost. The clearing around the cabin sparkled with ice crystals, beautiful and serene. It seemed impossible that the same peaceful setting had harbored such terror hours before. I woke Cameron for his shift, then joined Leanne in the kitchen where she was brewing coffee. She looked exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes suggesting she'd gotten no more sleep than I had. "How's Sam?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Finally sleeping," Leanne replied. "The scratch isn't deep, thankfully. Probably from a branch rather than—" She didn't finish the sentence. We sipped our coffee in silence, both watching the trees beyond the window. In daylight, the forest seemed innocuous, just pines and undergrowth, nothing to suggest the presence of abnormal predators. "Do you think they're gone?" Leanne finally asked. "I hope so," I said, unwilling to offer false reassurance. "Most predators hunt at night." "What are they, Javier? Really?" I hesitated. "I don't know. Something adapted to these woods. Something that's learned to hunt humans." "But you've been thinking about it for 2 years," she pressed. "You must have theories." I had theories, of course. Hours of late-night research into cryptid sightings, genetic anomalies in wolf populations, even government experiments gone wrong. Nothing had provided satisfactory explanations for what I'd encountered. "Whatever they are," I said finally, "they're intelligent, organized, and they see us as prey. That's all that matters right now." Cameron joined us, pouring himself coffee with hands that still trembled slightly. "Everything's quiet outside. No sign of movement." "We should leave," Leanne said firmly. "Pack up and go while it's daylight." I nodded my agreement. "As soon as Sam wakes up." We began gathering our belongings, moving with the quiet efficiency of people in shock. Adam cleaned and stowed his rifle, explaining that his family had hunted for generations and he'd learned marksmanship from his grandfather. "I never actually shot at them," he clarified. "Just warning shots." "Good thing," I replied. "I think killing one would have made the others more aggressive." Sam emerged from her room around 9 a.m., looking pale but composed. Her bandaged arm was held protectively against her chest, but she insisted she could drive. "I'm not staying another minute," she declared. We packed the cars quickly, eager to put distance between ourselves and the forest. As I locked the cabin, performing a final check to ensure we'd left everything in order, Adam approached with a concerned expression. "Do you smell that?" he asked. I paused, inhaling deeply. A musky odor hung in the air, animal but not quite familiar, like wet dog combined with something more acrid. It hadn't been present when we arrived yesterday. "They've been marking territory," Adam said quietly. "Around the entire cabin. It's a warning." I scanned the tree line one last time before hurrying to my car. The others were already in their vehicles, engines running, waiting only for my signal to depart. As I slid behind the wheel, movement caught my eye, just at the forest's edge, partially concealed by undergrowth. One of the creatures stood watching us, more visible in daylight than it had been in darkness. Its size confirmed my worst fears. Standing on all fours, it easily reached 4 feet at the shoulder, its body lean yet powerful. The shape was canine, yet wrong somehow. Proportions slightly off, limbs too long, jaw too heavy. Its fur was a mottled gray-brown that provided perfect camouflage among the pines. but it was the eyes that froze my blood. Amber yellow and unmistakably intelligent, watching our departure with what appeared to be calculation rather than mere animal curiosity. I started the engine and led our small convoy down the gravel driveway. In my rearview mirror, I could see more shapes emerging from the trees to watch us leave. 3, 4, possibly 5 distinct forms. They made no move to pursue, seemingly content to reclaim their territory. None of us spoke about what we'd seen until we reached the main highway, signal bars finally returning to our phones. We pulled into a roadside diner, ordering breakfast that none of us had much appetite for. "We need to report this," Leanne said eventually. "Some kind of dangerous pack is living in those woods. People need to be warned." "And tell them what?" I countered. "That we were chased by monsters while trespassing at a Halloween party during a pandemic lockdown." "They weren't monsters," Adam said quietly. "Just animals. Unusually large wolves, maybe wolf-dog hybrids gone feral. It happens." Sam shook her head vehemently. "Those weren't just wolves, hybrid or otherwise. The way they moved, the way they coordinated, they were hunting us specifically." "The Rangers should know," Cameron insisted. "Whatever explanation there is, those things are dangerous." In the end, we compromised. Adam called the Regional Forest Service office, reporting a sighting of unusually large predators near the cabin's coordinates. He described them as possible wolf-dog hybrids, aggressive but avoiding direct confrontation. The ranger who took the call seemed concerned but not alarmed, promising to send someone to investigate. None of us mentioned the intelligence we'd witnessed, the deliberate herding tactics, or the impossible size and proportions. Some details seemed too fantastical to share, too likely to undermine the credibility of our warning. As we prepared to go our separate ways, a subdued mood settled over our group. The shared experience had changed something between us, created a bond of survival but also of doubt and unanswered questions. "What happens now?" Sam asked, her injured arm cradled against her chest. "We go home," I said. "We try to make sense of what happened." But I knew, as I suspect we all did, that some experiences resist rational explanation. The creatures in those woods existed in a category beyond our comfortable understanding of the natural world. Not supernatural, perhaps, but certainly not normal. And I knew with cold certainty that they remained there still, controlling their territory, hunting with intelligence that no wild animal should possess, waiting for the next humans foolish enough to venture into their domain. The drive home passed in a blur of fatigue and lingering adrenaline. Every dark shape along the highway made my heart rate spike, though rational thought insisted the creatures couldn't have followed us this far. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion had overwhelmed fear, and I collapsed into bed fully clothed. Dreams came immediately, vivid and disturbing, running through endless woods pursued by shadows that moved with terrible purpose. In the dream I could hear their communication, not in growls but in something more complex, almost linguistic in its patterns. I woke gasping, sheets twisted around me, the afternoon sun streaming through blinds I'd forgotten to close. Over the next few days, our group maintained constant contact through texts and calls, sharing nightmares, comparing details we remembered, searching for explanations that might restore our sense of a rational world. Cameron found news reports from previous years, hikers gone missing in those same woods, bodies never recovered despite extensive searches. Adam researched wolf behaviors and concluded nothing matched what we'd encountered. Leanne spoke with a biology professor at her university, who suggested some form of canine gigantism combined with unusual pack dynamics, but even she admitted the explanation felt inadequate. Sam's scratch became infected despite proper care, requiring antibiotics and leaving a scar that she showed me via video call, 3 parallel lines that the doctor had attributed to a branch, but that we both knew came from something else entirely. A week after Halloween, I received a call from Francis, my cousin's husband. "Hey, thanks for cleaning up so well," he began casually. "Lance might head up there next weekend if you want to join him." My throat constricted at the thought. "I think I'll pass this time." "Everything okay? You sound strange?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share. "Francis, has Lance ever mentioned seeing anything unusual in those woods? Any weird animals?" A pause, too long to be meaningless. "Why do you ask?" "We saw something while we were there. Several somethings, actually. Large predators moving in coordinated patterns." Another silence. Then, "Lance doesn't go into those woods after dark. Never has. Says it doesn't feel right." And you never asked why? Some things are better left unquestioned, Francis replied, his tone suddenly serious. The cabin's been in his family for generations. His grandfather used to say the forest had its own guardians, neither good nor evil, just territorial. You knew, I said, realization dawning. You knew something was out there. I knew there were stories, he corrected. Old hunting tales, local legends, nothing concrete. Why didn't you warn us? Would you have believed me? By the way, don't go in the woods at night because there might be monsters, he sighed. Besides, they don't bother you if you don't bother them. Stay near the cabin. Respect the boundaries. We didn't know there were boundaries to respect, I replied, anger rising. Sam could have been killed. I'm sorry, Francis said, sounding genuinely remorseful. Most people visit, enjoy the scenery from the porch, maybe hike the marked trails during daylight. They never encounter anything unusual. What are they? I asked directly. I don't know, nobody does. The local indigenous tribes had names for them, stories passed down through generations. The early European settlers reported encounters too, usually fatal ones. Modern science has no classification for them. But they exist, I insisted. We all saw them. Yes, Francis conceded. They exist, and they've claimed that territory as their own for far longer than humans have been building cabins there. After ending the call, I sat in stunned silence, processing this confirmation of our experience. Part of me had still hoped for a rational explanation. Stress, group hysteria, ordinary animals misidentified in darkness and fear. Francis had eliminated those comfortable possibilities. That evening, our group gathered on a video call. I shared what I'd learned, watching their expressions shift from vindication to renewed unease. The knowledge that others before us had encountered these creatures, that their existence was known, even if only through folklore, somehow made the experience more rather than less disturbing. So what do we do with this information? Cameron asked eventually. Nothing, Adam replied. What can we do? Report that we confirmed some local legend about forest predators? We'd sound insane. They're dangerous, Sam insisted. People should know. People already know, I said. At least the locals do. It's why the area has so few permanent residents despite the beautiful landscape. It's why the hiking trails don't extend deep into those woods. They've adapted, created an unspoken boundary. And we crossed it, Leanne concluded quietly. The conversation continued late into the night, but we reached no satisfying resolution. Some experiences defy neat conclusions, leaving only questions and the lingering awareness that the world is larger, stranger, and more dangerous than we prefer to believe. In the months that followed, I researched obsessively, folklore about forest guardians, scientific papers on undiscovered species, even conspiracy theories about government breeding programs. Nothing provided definitive answers, but patterns emerged across disparate sources, intelligent predators that walk the line between wolf and something else, territorial rather than unnecessarily aggressive, possessing communication abilities beyond normal animal capacity. I never returned to the cabin. Lance sold the property the following summer, saying only that it was time to let it go. I didn't ask if his decision related to what we had encountered. Some questions are better left unasked when you fear the answer. Sometimes, particularly on nights when the moon is full and bright, I dream of those woods again. In the dreams, I understand more than I did while awake, that the creatures were neither supernatural nor entirely natural, but something that evolved alongside humans while remaining separate, intelligent enough to avoid documentation, powerful enough to defend their diminishing territory against encroachment. And I wonder, as civilization continues to expand into the last wild places, how many other boundaries we cross unknowingly, how many other guardians watch from the shadows, waiting to defend what remains of their domain. I don't share these thoughts with others anymore. The Halloween of 2020 has become our secret. 5 people who glimpsed something beyond ordinary experience, who carry the knowledge that not all predators have been cataloged, not all territories appear on maps. The forest keeps its secrets, and sometimes, if we're fortunate, it allows those who glimpse those secrets to retreat with their lives, carrying nothing but questions that will never find satisfying answers, and memories that blur, with time, into something that might almost have been a dream. Almost. My name is Daniel Whitfield, and this happened in 2013 when I was living off the grid in a small cabin near Glacier Bay in Alaska. The nearest semblance of civilization lay several miles beyond the coast, meaning my only neighbors were brown bears and scattered spruce trees that creaked against the wind. I'd chosen this isolation deliberately, craving escape from the ceaseless noise of city life, the crushing pressure of daily obligations, and the steady drizzle of bad news that seemed to pour from every screen. I remember that March morning with unsettling clarity. The pale light barely penetrated the frost-covered windows as I stoked the wood stove, listening to the snap and pop of the kindling. Outside, a heavy fog had settled over the landscape, turning familiar landmarks into vague, ghostly silhouettes. I'd spent most of the winter alone, chopping wood, trapping rabbits, and storing dried salmon for sustenance. Solitude had become my companion, though I talked to myself more than I'd like to admit. My technological connections to the outside world were sparse but precious. A small solar panel rig that generated just enough power for an LED lamp and a tiny hand-crank radio. Some evenings I'd fiddle with the dials, straining to pick up broadcasts from Juno, or even static that resembled human voices. Most nights brought nothing but the hollow whisper of empty airwaves, a sound that eventually became as familiar as my own heartbeat. The isolation had settled into my bones by then. I'd developed habits and rituals to mark the passing of days. Morning coffee brewed over the fire, afternoons spent checking trap lines or repairing equipment, evenings reading weathered paperbacks by oil lamplight. My cabin wasn't much. A single room patched together from old timbers, a makeshift outhouse behind a massive spruce stump, and a half-collapsed shed where I hung fish to dry. The space smelled of wood smoke, pine resin, and the metallic tang of cold that never quite left, even with the stove burning. That morning, I'd woken before dawn from a dream I couldn't recall, but that left me uneasy. Something about footprints in snow, about being followed. I dismissed it as the natural anxiety of a man who had gone too long without human contact. After breakfast, a piece of hardtack and some bitter coffee, I decided to check my trap lines and gather more firewood. The day was still, unnaturally quiet even for this remote region. No birds called, no wind stirred the branches. The silence pressed against my eardrums like a physical force. As I trudged through ankle-deep snow, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in my sanctuary. It was mid-afternoon when I found them, footprints in the fresh snow where none should have been. They crossed behind my cabin, heading east toward the dense thicket of alders that separated my clearing from the rugged slope that led down to the bay. They weren't mine. I knew my own tracks. And they weren't made by animals either. These were unmistakably human. Large, heavy boot prints pressed deep into the powder. I followed them for nearly a quarter mile before they disappeared into a tangle of brush and deadfall. My pulse quickened as I scanned the tree line, suddenly aware of how exposed I was against the white backdrop of snow. Nobody should have been out there, not without announcing themselves. Among those who chose this lifestyle, there existed an unspoken code. If you were passing through someone else's territory, you announced yourself in a friendly way. You didn't skulk around leaving mysterious tracks. I returned to my cabin, locked the door, something I rarely bothered with before, and spent the evening by the stove, jumping at every crack and groan of the timber walls. I told myself it was probably just a lost hiker, maybe someone exploring from one of the small settlements along the coast. But as darkness fell and the temperature dropped, I found myself checking the locks twice, then 3 times, before climbing into my sleeping bag. That night, the silence that had once offered comfort turned oppressive. I lay awake, straining to hear anything beyond the faint hiss of snow against the window panes. The darkness seemed to pulse with potential threat. For the first time since arriving at the cabin, I slept with my hunting knife under my pillow, its worn handle pressing reassuringly against my palm. I'd come to Alaska seeking quiet. Now I had it, stretching in every direction like an endless void. But something had changed. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It felt occupied, watchful, as if the silence itself had eyes. Morning couldn't come fast enough. But when it did, bringing with it a pale, watery light, I wasn't sure if I felt relieved or more unsettled. Because in that half-light, looking out my frosted window, I could swear I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, just for a moment before it melted back into the shadows of the forest. A few days passed without incident, though my nerves remained on edge. I tried to laugh off my anxieties, attributing them to the isolation playing tricks on my mind. Hadn't I chosen this life precisely to escape the paranoia and tension of civilization? Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally shifted in my environment. While splitting logs one afternoon, axe swinging in rhythmic arcs that sent wood chips flying, I noticed something near the water's edge, a battered blue tarp partially buried in the snow. The sight stopped me mid-swing. I was meticulously organized with my supplies. Nothing was ever left out, especially not near the water where spring floods could claim it. I approached cautiously, half expecting to find signs of a hasty campsite. The tarp had been dragged through mud and snow, one corner torn as if caught on something sharp. When I lifted it, the fabric was stiff with frost, and something else, dark stains that looked unsettlingly like dried blood. My stomach tightened as I turned it over in my hands, searching for an explanation that wouldn't feed my growing unease. Probably just whale blood, I said aloud, my voice sounding thin in the cold air. Some fishermen using this as a processing tarp. But the explanation rang hollow, especially since I hadn't seen any boats pass by in weeks. I tossed the tarp aside and tried to focus on my work, but my hands trembled slightly as I gripped the axe handle. That night, I wedged a chair under my doorknob before retiring to my sleeping bag, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams as wind scraped against the roof like desperate fingernails. The next morning dawned gray and threatening, heavy clouds hanging low over the bay. I forced myself through my usual routine, kindling the fire, melting snow for water, checking my food stores. Normalcy felt like a thin veneer over something increasingly abnormal. I caught myself whispering, "Hello?" into empty corners, half expecting a response. Near midday, I ventured out to collect more firewood. The air held the metallic tang that promised snow, and I wanted to be prepared for another potential storm. As I made my way toward a promising stand of deadfall birch, something caught my eye, a splash of unnatural color against the white and gray landscape. Half buried near a willow tree lay a woman's hiking boot, not old and weathered, but relatively new, the leather still supple despite the dampness, the laces intact. I crouched beside it, my breath forming clouds that dissipated in the still air. Who would leave a perfectly good boot behind? I picked it up, turning it in my hands. Inside, a small smear of something dark stained the insole. I sniffed cautiously and recoiled at the metallic, sour smell. My fingers came away tacky with what I now recognized unmistakably as blood, not animal blood, not the kind I was accustomed to from dressing game, but human blood. Someone got hurt, I said aloud, the words hanging in the air like an accusation. I dropped the boot and stepped back, wiping my hand frantically against my pants. My gaze darted to the surrounding forest, suddenly alien and threatening. The trees seemed to lean inward, witnesses to something I couldn't comprehend. I stood frozen, staring at the distant mountains, their peaks disappearing into low-hanging clouds. Should I leave? Pack what I could and make the dangerous journey back to civilization. But I had no vehicle waiting. My only escape route was my small boat, and with the sea still winter rough, the 2-day journey would be perilous at best, fatal at worst. I forced myself to breathe deeply, to think rationally. Perhaps there was an innocent explanation. A hiker with a minor injury who had changed into dry footwear and accidentally left the boot behind. But even as I formed the thought, I knew it didn't fit. No one hiked these woods alone in late winter without serious preparation. And no one abandoned usable gear, especially not when injured. I left the boot where I'd found it, but its image stayed with me as I gathered wood with mechanical movements, constantly glancing over my shoulder. The silence of the forest seemed to have acquired weight and intent. Each crack of a branch made me flinch. Each shadow movement sent my heart racing. Back at the cabin, I double-checked the locks and positioned myself by the window, rifle across my knees as darkness fell. The short day gave way to a long, tense night. I dozed fitfully, waking at imagined sounds. A footstep on the porch, a whisper at the window, the subtle click of the door latch testing. Dawn brought no relief, only the certainty that something was terribly wrong in my isolated sanctuary. As I forced down a breakfast I couldn't taste, I made a decision. I would scout the perimeter of my territory carefully. If I found nothing more alarming, I would stay, keeping vigilant. If I found further evidence of trouble, I would risk the journey to the nearest settlement, regardless of conditions. I armed myself with my rifle and hunting knife, checked that my compass was secure in my pocket, and stepped out into the gray morning. The air felt different somehow, heavier, charged with anticipation. The forest waited, patient and knowing. I had barely covered 100 yards when I saw it. A dark shape behind a cluster of alder trees, unnaturally still against the shifting backdrop of branches. My throat constricted as I approached, rifle raised, steps deliberate and silent. What I found would change everything. The body lay face down in a shallow depression where snow had melted away to reveal last autumn's dead leaves. A young man, perhaps 30, wearing a green down jacket now sodden and dirty from the elements. His arms were twisted unnaturally beneath him, his legs splayed as if he'd fallen from a height. Even from several feet away, I could see he wasn't breathing. For a long moment I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. The forest around me continued its indifferent silence. No birds called, no animals rustled in the underbrush. Just the soft whisper of my own ragged breathing and the pounding of blood in my ears. "Hello?" I called stupidly, as if the man might answer. My voice sounded alien in the stillness. When no response came, of course, none came, I approached cautiously, rifle still ready, though I knew the threat here wasn't from the body. I crouched beside him, noting details with a strange, detached clarity. Unshaven face, dark hair matted with dirt and frozen blood, no gloves on his stiff, pale hands. He wore hiking boots similar to mine, though newer, and cargo pants with multiple pockets. Equipment for wilderness survival. With trembling hands, I rolled him over just enough to see what had killed him. A deep wound gaped in his chest, the fabric around it stiff with dried blood. Not a gunshot. The entry was too jagged, more like a stabbing, or perhaps impalement on something sharp. His face, partially revealed, was frozen in a grimace of surprise and pain. I let him settle back and stood up quickly, fighting a wave of nausea. Sweat ran down my back despite the cold as the implications crashed over me. This wasn't an accident. Someone had killed this man, someone who might still be nearby. And that someone wasn't me. The realization shattered whatever remained of my sense of security. I was no longer alone in my isolation. Or rather, I was alone with a killer. My gaze swept the surrounding forest, suddenly seeing potential hiding places in every shadow, behind every tree trunk. I needed to think clearly, to make decisions that would keep me alive. First, I couldn't leave the body here, not so far from the cabin where I might lose track of it. I needed to keep it in sight, as macabre as that seemed. Not just for any evidence it might provide, but because whoever had done this might return. With grim determination, I grabbed the dead man's ankles and began the gruesome task of dragging him toward my cabin. His body moved stiffly over the rough ground, catching on exposed roots and stones. I'm not proud of treating human remains this way, but fear makes pragmatists of us all. I positioned him near enough to my cabin that I could keep watch, but far enough away that, well, the practical considerations of a dead body and freezing temperatures were something I didn't want to contemplate too closely. I covered him with the tarp I'd found earlier, weighing down the corners with stones. Back inside, I barricaded the door with my small table and positioned myself by the window with my rifle. Questions tumbled through my mind. Who was this man? Had he been alone or with others? Was his killer still in the area, and if so, why? Was I the next target, or just an unfortunate witness? The day crawled by with excruciating slowness. I allowed myself to move away from the window only for the most urgent necessities, keeping my rifle always within reach. As the light began to fade, transforming the forest into a maze of deepening shadows, my nerves stretched to breaking point. Just as dusk settled fully over the landscape, I heard it. A muffled cough somewhere outside. The sound froze me mid-breath. It was unmistakably human, undeniably close. I gripped my rifle tighter, fingers slick with sweat despite the cold, and moved to the window with practiced silence. At first, I saw nothing but the familiar outlines of trees and the dim shape of the tarp-covered body. Then, movement. A tall figure darted between trees at the edge of the clearing, moving with deliberate stealth. I caught only a glimpse, the outline of someone in a thick coat, topped with what appeared to be a strange, lopsided hat or cap. My heart pounded so violently I feared it might be audible outside the cabin. I steadied my breathing, forcing myself to focus, to track the movement as the figure slipped behind a large spruce tree about 30 yards from my door. "I know you're out there," I called, my voice cracking slightly. The declaration felt ridiculous the moment it left my lips, but the silence that followed was worse. a heavy, expectant void that seemed to press against the walls of the cabin. No response came. The figure remained hidden, but I felt its presence as surely as if it stood before me, watchful, patient, calculating. I kept my rifle trained on the tree where I'd last seen movement, arms beginning to ache from the strain of maintaining position. Minutes stretched like hours. The remaining daylight drained from the sky, leaving only the faint illumination of stars and a thin crescent moon. I dared not light my lamp, unwilling to make myself a clearer target. In the darkness, every shadow seemed to shift and breathe with malevolent intent. As full night descended, I heard them, footsteps circling the cabin. Light, careful steps crunching softly in the snow, moving from window to window as if testing for weaknesses. I stood by the door, rifle ready, mouth dry with fear, whispering curses and prayers in equal measure. The doorknob rattled. I nearly fired from pure, startled reflex. "Open up!" The voice was male, steady, and almost calm, as if he were a neighbor stopping by for coffee rather than a potential killer testing my defenses in the wilderness. I remained silent, finger hovering near the trigger. The door rattled again, harder this time. Something scraped against the wood, a knife blade perhaps, testing the strength of the barrier between us. "Go away!" I shouted, my voice surprisingly strong despite my terror. A pause followed, then a sound I hadn't expected. A chuckle, a strange half-laugh that raised the hair on my neck. The casual amusement in that sound was somehow more terrifying than rage or threats would have been. I tightened my grip on the rifle, prepared to fire through the door if necessary. But after a moment, I heard footsteps retreating, fading into the trees. The night stretched endlessly before me. I didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin's timbers, every whisper of wind became the return of my visitor. By the time the first gray light of dawn filtered through the windows, I had made my decision. I couldn't stay. Whatever was happening here, whatever had happened to the dead man outside, I wanted no part of it. I would take my chances with the sea. First light brought a steely determination born of a sleepless night. I moved quietly, gathering essentials, dried fish, a canteen of water, spare clothes, my hunting knife, and of course my rifle. I checked the bolt action meticulously, loaded it fully, and tucked extra ammunition into my pocket. Whatever awaited me outside, I would not face it unprepared. I listened at the door for long minutes, hearing nothing but the soft sigh of wind through the trees. The forest appeared innocent in the pale morning light, revealing no hint of the previous night's terror. But I knew better now. The wilderness I had sought for its peaceful solitude had become a hunting ground, and I was no longer the hunter. Taking a deep breath, I unbarricaded the door and slipped outside, staying low and close to the cabin wall. The dead man still lay under the tarp, undisturbed. The air held the sharp bite of coming snow, and fog clung to the lower reaches of the forest, creating pockets of ghostly whiteness between the trees. My plan was simple. Make my way down to the bay where my boat was secured, launch it, and follow the coastline south to the nearest settlement. It would be a grueling journey in cold, rough waters, but I saw no alternative. Staying meant certain confrontation with whoever had killed the man in the green jacket, and possibly others. I moved away from the cabin toward the small path that led down to the shore, every sense hyper-alert. 20 yards from safety, I saw him. He was crouched behind a fallen log, partially concealed by morning mist, but unmistakably watching my cabin door. He hadn't seen me yet. For a moment I had the advantage of surprise, and in that moment I took in every detail of the man who had stalked me through the night. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet or more, with a gaunt frame draped in a black wool coat patched at the elbows. Heavy boots covered his feet, and a dark beanie was pulled low over a weathered face framed by a beard streaked with gray. His hollow cheeks and sunken eyes gave him the appearance of someone who had gone too long without proper food or rest. But what drew my gaze most was the object in his hands. A long knife with a blade that caught the morning light, its edge visibly worn from frequent use. Our eyes met simultaneously. I registered the moment awareness dawned on his face, followed by something like pleasure, the satisfaction of a predator sighting prey. My heart kicked violently against my ribs. I raised my rifle and shouted something. I can't recall the exact words, only that they emerged as a hoarse, desperate command. He responded by slowly rising to his feet, his movements unnervingly deliberate. Then, Bizarrely, he smiled. A polite, almost cordial expression that matched the calm voice from the previous night. The incongruity of that smile froze me for a crucial second. Then he rushed forward with shocking speed. I pulled the trigger. Click. The misfire sent a wave of cold horror through me. I frantically tried to cycle the bolt, to chamber another round, but he was on me before I could complete the action. He struck the rifle with his arm, sending it sideways, then slammed into me with his full weight. I stumbled backward, tripped over an exposed root, and landed hard on my back, the impact forcing the air from my lungs. Above me, his figure blocked out the pale sky, knife raised. I kicked upward desperately, screaming, "Get away from me!" He answered with a grunt, grabbing my jacket with his free hand, dragging me toward him. His breath hit my face, the sour stench of rotten food and unwashed teeth. I struck out blindly, my fist connecting with his jaw, sending pain shooting through my knuckles. The blow barely seemed to register with him. His grip remained iron. He swung the knife in a tight arc. I twisted sideways, feeling the blade slice through my left sleeve and into the flesh beneath. Pain flared hot and immediate. He swung again, and I rolled, feeling the blade tear fabric but miss flesh by millimeters. This was no choreographed fight from a film. It was ugly, desperate, and chaotic. Two men rolling in frozen dirt and dead leaves, panting and clawing like animals. His weight pinned me temporarily, the knife inching toward my throat. I could see flecks of something dark under his fingernails in the creases of his knuckles. Blood. Someone else's blood. With a surge of adrenaline, I brought my knee up hard into his ribs. His breath left him in a wheezing gasp, his grip loosening just enough. I tore myself free, scraping my palms raw on frozen gravel as I scrambled away. As I regained my footing, he lunged forward again, knife extended. I leapt backward, and in that moment, Providence intervened. He slipped on wet leaves, momentarily off balance. I seized my chance. Grasping my fallen rifle by the barrel, I swung it like a club. The stock connected with his shoulder with a sickening thud. He yelled, the first clear expression of pain I'd heard from him, and the knife fell from his grip. I swung again, aiming higher this time, and caught the side of his face. He collapsed onto his back, dazed but not unconscious. Blood began flowing from a gash near his temple, soaking into his matted beard. The knife lay several feet away, and I lunged for it, but he kicked out, sending it skittering across frozen ground. We circled each other like wolves, both wounded, both deadly. Blood soaked my left sleeve, the cut beneath burning with each movement. He was breathing heavily, one hand pressed to his injured shoulder, the other formed into a claw-like defensive position. I could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing his chances, measuring the distance to his weapon. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, my voice raw. He didn't answer with words. Instead, his expression shifted into something beyond comprehension, a look that communicated he needed no reason, that violence was its own justification. In that moment, I understood I faced something I couldn't rationalize or negotiate with. I feinted toward the knife. He took the bait, rushing to intercept me. His shoulder collided with my midsection, driving me backward. We crashed to the ground together, the rifle spinning from my grasp. His elbow smashed into my shoulder, sending fresh pain radiating down my arm. Instinct took over. My hand found a rock, cold and solid against my palm. I swung it upward with all my remaining strength, connecting with the side of his neck. He gasped, a wet, choking sound, and his weight shifted. I pushed him off, rolling sideways, then scrambled toward the dropped knife. My fingers closed around the handle just as he rose to his knees. Our eyes locked. I saw no fear in his, only a cold fury and perhaps surprise that his hunt had taken this turn. He began to rise. I didn't give him the chance to complete the movement. I rushed forward, knife extended, striking blindly, tears of pain and fear blurring my vision. The blade met resistance, then sank inward. He made a startled sound, more surprise than pain, as I felt the warm wetness of blood on my hand. He staggered backward a step, looking down at the wound in his chest with something like curiosity. I struck again, the motion automatic, desperate. This time, he went limp, falling face first onto the mossy ground with a finality that left no doubt. I stood over him, panting, trembling, the bloody knife still clutched in my hand. The forest had fallen silent again. No birds, no wind, just the rasp of my own labored breathing. I'd killed a man. The knowledge sat heavy and cold in my stomach. After a moment, I knelt beside him, pressing shaking fingers to his neck to check for a pulse I knew wouldn't be there. Nothing. He was gone. Self-defense, I told myself. He had killed that other poor soul first. I only did what I had to do. But the justification rang hollow in the face of such violent death. I looked around at the empty forest, aware that there was no one to help or judge me. I was utterly alone with what I had done. The pain in my arm reasserted itself, sharp and insistent. Blood had soaked through my sleeve, and when I examined the wound, I found a clean, deep slice that would need attention. I tore a strip from my shirt and bound it tightly, wincing as pressure aggravated the injury. I couldn't stay here. Not with two bodies, not with the possibility of others involved in whatever terrible business had brought these men to my isolated corner of wilderness. I needed to reach civilization, to find authorities who could make sense of what had happened. With grim determination, I gathered what supplies I could salvage and began the long trek toward the shore where my boat waited. Each step was careful, my eyes constantly scanning the forest for any sign of further threat. The knife, still stained with blood I couldn't bring myself to wipe away, remained clutched in my right hand, a grotesque talisman against further danger. As I walked, the wilderness I had once found so peaceful now seemed charged with malevolent awareness, as if the trees themselves were witnesses to violence they would neither forget nor forgive. The journey to the shore felt interminable. Every shadow contained potential threat. Every sound signaled possible pursuit. The wound in my arm throbbed with each heartbeat, a steady reminder of how narrowly I had escaped death. Blood had seeped through my makeshift bandage, leaving a dark stain that spread slowly across the fabric. When I finally reached the rocky stretch of coastline where my small boat was secured, the sight of open water brought unexpected emotion, not relief, but a profound sense of vulnerability. The sea stretched gray and forbidding before me, white-capped waves signaling rough conditions ahead. The journey would be perilous, but staying meant certain death, whether from exposure, infection, or the possibility that my attacker hadn't been working alone. My boat, a modest 16-foot craft with an outboard motor I'd painstakingly maintained through the winter, seemed impossibly fragile against the vastness of the Alaskan waters. Still, it represented my only chance. I worked methodically despite my injury, checking the fuel levels, securing my meager supplies, untying the mooring ropes with fingers stiff from cold and shock. As I prepared to push off from shore, I turned for one last look at the forest where I'd sought peace and found violence instead. The trees stood silent and indifferent, revealing nothing of the horrors they concealed. Somewhere beyond that green-black wall lay two dead men. One, a victim I'd never known. The other, a killer I'd been forced to become. The guilt of taking a life, even in self-defense, settled over me like a physical weight. I had come to Alaska to escape the moral complexities of civilization. Yet here in the wilderness, I had confronted the most primal ethical dilemma of all. Kill or be killed. The simplicity of that choice offered no comfort. With a final effort, I pushed the boat into deeper water, started the motor, and guided the craft away from shore. The cold spray stung my face as I navigated through the choppy waters, heading south toward the distant promise of human contact. The journey would take at least a day and a night if conditions held, longer if the weather worsened. I had enough food and water to survive, but the exposure and my injury were concerning variables. Hours passed in a haze of pain and vigilance. I steered mechanically, my thoughts circling around the events of the past days. Who was the man in the green jacket? Why had he been killed? Had my attacker been responsible for other deaths in these remote areas? The questions offered no answers, only deeper uncertainty. As dusk approached, the sea grew more hostile. Waves slapped against the hull with increasing force, sending shudders through the small craft. The sky darkened ominously, not just with the approaching night, but with storm clouds gathering on the horizon. I faced a difficult decision. Continue in increasingly dangerous conditions or attempt to find shelter along the coast until morning. Safety won over speed. I guided the boat toward a small, sheltered cove I remembered from previous explorations. The beach was narrow and rocky, but the surrounding cliffs offered protection from the wind. As I secured the boat and gathered what I needed for the night, exhaustion crashed over me like another wave. I found minimal shelter in a shallow depression beneath an overhanging rock. It wasn't ideal, but it would keep the worst of the elements at bay. Using driftwood and the emergency matches from my pack, I managed to start a small fire. A risk, perhaps, but hypothermia posed a more immediate threat than discovery. In the flickering firelight, I properly examined my arm. The cut was deep but clean, the edges already beginning to close. I cleaned it as best I could with seawater, wincing at the sting, then rebandaged it with a cleaner strip of cloth. Infection remained a concern, but for now the bleeding had slowed to a manageable seep. I huddled near the fire, eating a small portion of dried fish without tasting it. The events of the morning played in continuous loop behind my eyes, the look on the man's face as my knife found its mark, the strange absence of fear in his expression even as life left him. I couldn't reconcile the violence with my understanding of myself. I had killed someone. That fact altered my identity in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by pain, cold, and nightmare fragments where I alternated between hunter and hunted. Dawn found me stiff and fevered, the wound in my arm hot to the touch. I forced myself to move, to continue the journey while I still had the strength. The storm had passed in the night, leaving a deceptively calm sea that belied the turbulence of my thoughts. I pushed off from the shore, motor sputtering briefly before catching, and set course once more for civilization. By mid-afternoon, I spotted the first signs of human habitation. A small fishing village nestled in a protected harbor, smoke rising from chimneys, boats bobbing at simple wooden docks. The sight brought tears to my eyes. I had survived. I had escaped. But I had not emerged unchanged. The next days passed in a blur of official statements, medical treatment, and questioning. I told my story repeatedly to state troopers, FBI agents, and local authorities. They identified the man in the green jacket as a graduate student from Anchorage who had been reported missing 3 weeks earlier. My attacker remained unidentified at first. No ID, no matching fingerprints in their databases. Later, I learned they had connected him to at least 3 other deaths in remote areas of Alaska and the Yukon over the previous 2 years. Hikers, researchers, isolated homesteaders, all found with similar stab wounds, all in areas where a man matching his description had been reported. They never discovered a motive. Some investigators speculated about mental illness, others about some twisted hunting game. The truth died with him in that forest clearing. They ruled my actions self-defense. No charges were filed. I was free to go, to rebuild my life, to try to forget. But freedom from legal consequence didn't bring freedom from memory. I never returned to my cabin. I couldn't face the silence of those woods again, knowing what it concealed. Instead, I moved to a small coastal town, took a job on a fishing boat, surrounded myself with the constant noise and movement of human activity. I built new routines, made casual acquaintances, constructed a life that resembled normalcy. But some nights, when the wind picks up and branches scrape against my window, I find myself reaching for a weapon that isn't there. Some mornings, I wake convinced I've heard footsteps circling my house. The wilderness taught me something I can't unlearn, that the line between safety and danger, between being the hunter and the hunted, is perilously thin. I don't know if anyone ever found those bodies after I left. The authorities mounted an expedition based on my directions, but spring thaws had begun, altering landscapes, erasing evidence. Nature reclaims its own quickly in those remote regions. Perhaps the forest has already grown over the site of my desperate struggle, covering bloodstains with new moss, filling boot prints with fresh soil. What haunts me isn't fear that he might still be out there. I know with certainty he isn't. What haunts me is how easily I stepped into violence when survival demanded it. How natural the knife felt in my hand when driven by primal fear. We venture into wilderness, seeking connection with something essential and pure, something we believe civilization has diluted in us. Sometimes we find it, and sometimes that discovery is terrifying. I still feel uneasy in complete silence. I keep a radio playing softly most nights, filling the dark hours with human voices. I've never again lived alone. The experience changed me in fundamental ways, made me more cautious, more aware of the fragility of safety, more conscious of how quickly the veneer of civilization can peel away when circumstances demand. I came to Alaska seeking solitude, seeking the silence beyond modern noise. I found it. But in that profound quiet, I discovered something else. That silence itself can become a presence, watchful and knowing. That emptiness can fill with threat. That the greatest dangers sometimes come not from the wilderness itself, but from what it reveals in us and in others when all distractions fall away. Even now, years later, I sometimes dream of those days in the cabin, of waking to footprints in fresh snow, of the weight of the knife in my hand. I wake from these dreams with the certainty that something follows me still. Not the man I killed, but the knowledge of what I became in that moment of desperation. The understanding that within each of us waits the capacity for terrible violence when survival demands it. This is the lesson of true isolation, the wisdom of the wilderness. That we are never as far from our primal nature as we believe. That the line between human and animal blurs when pushed to extremes. It is a knowledge I carry with me always, a silence that never truly ends. I grew up with acres upon acres of woods behind my house in southeastern Pennsylvania, specifically Westbrook County. The landscape was a patchwork of farmland and forest, a place where suburban comfort gradually gave way to rural stillness. A local farmer owned most of the woodland, but nobody minded the neighborhood children exploring the area. Vast fields flanked both sides of the woods, and the farmer had once carved narrow trails through the trees to move cattle between pastures. Those woods were our kingdom. My brother, sister, and I claimed them as our playground, our refuge from the structured world of school and chores. We knew every fallen log, every fork in the path, every seasonal change that transformed our forest sanctuary. A shallow creek cut through the property, offering endless possibilities. Fishing in spring, swimming in summer, and what we called mucklucking in the muddier months, wading through silt to catch frogs and salamanders with our bare hands. We ventured there in all seasons, all weather conditions. Snow-covered branches in winter became our architectural challenges. Rain-soaked paths in autumn turned into natural obstacle courses. Sun-dappled clearings in summer served as our meeting spots. I even hiked those woods on moonlit nights as a child, finding the familiar terrain transformed into something more magical, but never threatening. The silver light filtering through leaves created patterns I could navigate blindfolded if needed. The wildlife was typical for the region. Foxes trotting through underbrush, raccoons washing food in the creek, deer bounding away at our approach, and squirrels chattering warnings from above. Nothing dangerous lurked there, at least not back then. This was 2018, before coyotes had reclaimed the territory, before I understood that not all wilderness welcomes human visitors. I was 11 years old when everything changed. The incident that transformed my relationship with those woods happened on what began as an ordinary autumn day. Looking back now, I recognize the subtle warning signs we ignored, the way the forest seemed to hold its breath as we entered. But at 11, I hadn't yet learned to read those signals. Mia had been my best friend since 3rd grade. She lived just 2 houses down, and we shared an adventurous spirit that often led us beyond the neighborhood boundaries. That Saturday in October 2018 dawned crisp and clear, perfect for exploration. We packed simple lunches, filled our water bottles, and set out before our parents could assign weekend chores. "Let's go all the way to Vine Hill today," I suggested, referring to our nickname for the elevated clearing where massive grapevines had grown thick enough to support our weight. We'd fashioned crude swings there, testing their strength cautiously before trusting them completely. Mia agreed enthusiastically. "Race you to the creek crossing," she called, already sprinting ahead. We hiked for most of the morning, following the main trail before branching off onto less defined paths that wound upward through increasingly dense vegetation. Conversation flowed easily between us. School drama, family annoyances, dreams of future adventures beyond our small town. The sunlight streamed through the canopy, creating dappled patterns that shifted with each breath of wind. By midday, we'd reached Vine Hill. The clearing offered a panoramic view of the valley below, trees stretching in every direction like a rumpled green blanket. The massive vines hung from sturdy oak branches, their woody tendrils thicker than my wrist. We took turns swinging out over the sloping hillside, the momentary weightlessness bringing shrieks of delight. After eating our sandwiches and apples, we sprawled in the patchy grass, cloud-watching and plotting the rest of our day. The sky remained perfectly clear, an endless expanse of October blue that promised hours more daylight for exploration. "We should head back along the ridge trail," I said eventually, brushing crumbs from my jeans. "It's longer, but there's that weird rock formation I wanted to show you." Mia checked her watch, a birthday gift she rarely removed. "We've got time," she agreed. "Mom doesn't expect me until dinner." We gathered our belongings and started down the hill toward the woods. The moment we stepped beneath the tree line, something subtle shifted. The temperature dropped several degrees, not unusual in the shade, but this felt different. More immediate, as though we'd crossed an invisible threshold into cooler air. More noticeably, clouds began gathering overhead, their edges visible through gaps in the foliage. "Weather's changing," Mia observed, zipping up her jacket. I nodded, suddenly uneasy without understanding why. Forecast said clear all day. We continued down the trail, our earlier carefree mood gradually replaced by a focused silence. The forest had grown quieter too. No birds called, no squirrels rustled through the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to have stilled, leaving the woods in an unnatural hush that pressed against my eardrums. The path narrowed as we descended, forcing us to walk single file through thicker undergrowth. Fallen leaves carpeted the ground, creating a satisfying crunch with each step. I walked ahead, occasionally holding branches aside for Mia. The rhythmic sound of our footsteps, crunch, 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 became almost hypnotic. Until I realized there was an echo. I stopped abruptly, causing Mia to bump into me from behind. "What's wrong?" she whispered, immediately matching my tension. "Listen," I said, remaining perfectly still. We both held our breath. For 5 seconds, nothing. Then, a soft shuffling of leaves about 20 yards behind us, slightly uphill from where we stood. "Something's following us," I said, keeping my voice low. Mia shook her head. "Probably just a deer. They're everywhere this time of year." To demonstrate my point, I deliberately took 2 loud steps forward, dragging my feet through the leaves. We waited, and seconds later heard an unmistakable mirroring of the sound, something dragging through the forest floor, matching my movement precisely. "See? I'm not copying you," Mia said, taking her own step forward. After her movement, we both heard it again, leaves shifting behind us, up the hill. We turned simultaneously, scanning the woods for the source. The forest seemed to darken as we watched, clouds now completely obscuring the sun. What had been merely cool air now felt genuinely cold. My breath formed small clouds in front of my face. "Do you see anything?" Mia whispered. I squinted, trying to make sense of the patterns of light and shadow between the trees. Something moved, or seemed to move, roughly 30 feet away. It wasn't the distinct outline of a deer or fox, but something larger and less defined. Then came the sound that transformed our unease into genuine fear. A deep, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath our feet. It wasn't the quick, nervous growl of a fox or the warning bark of a deer. This was something primal, something that didn't belong in these familiar woods. Mia's hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. Her nails dug into my skin through my jacket sleeve. "What was that?" Her voice had risen an octave. "Don't run," I managed to say, remembering warnings about predators and prey responses. "Back away slowly." We began retreating down the path, eyes fixed on the spot where we detected movement. The leaves there shifted again, parting as though something substantial was moving through them. But we couldn't see any animal, any form that made sense. Just disturbance without visible cause. With every backward step we took, the unseen entity seemed to advance, maintaining the same distance between us. The growl came again, louder this time, a sound that seemed to reverberate inside my chest cavity. It was a sound that didn't belong in these woods, didn't belong anywhere in this region. "Do you see it?" I hissed, desperately trying to make sense of what was happening. "I see the leaves moving," Mia responded, her voice trembling. "But there's nothing there. It's just empty space." She was right. Whatever force pushed through the forest debris left no visible outline, no shape we could identify. Just evidence of passage, branches swaying, leaves parting, undergrowth compressing, as though something substantial but invisible was stalking us. The rational part of my brain tried to understand. A trick of light, a deceptive wind pattern, perhaps an animal with coloration that blended perfectly with the forest background. But none of these explanations accounted for the growl, which came a third time, closer, deeper, vibrating through the ground beneath our feet. All pretense of calm evaporated. "Run!" I shouted, yanking Mia's arm as I spun around. We bolted down the trail, abandoning all caution. Behind us, the sound of pursuit was immediate, a heavy crashing through undergrowth, much faster than our earlier stalker had moved. Whatever had been pacing us was now chasing us, and gaining ground rapidly. Terror propelled us forward with reckless speed. Branches whipped our faces as we abandoned the trail for a more direct route toward home. My lungs burned and my legs pumped mechanically. I couldn't risk looking back, Couldn't spare the fraction of a second it might cost. Mia ran just behind me, her breathing ragged and punctuated by small, involuntary sounds of fear. The woods I'd known my entire life suddenly seemed alien and malevolent, full of hidden pitfalls and grasping branches that tore at our clothes and skin. The sounds of pursuit continued. Crashing vegetation, the occasional low growl, the sense of something massive displacing air behind us. The distance between us and our pursuer seemed to fluctuate. Sometimes it sounded yards away. Other moments, it seemed almost at our heels. "I can't," Mia gasped, stumbling on a protruding root. I grabbed her hand, pulling her forward. "Don't stop." We burst through a particularly dense section of underbrush and faced a steep embankment leading down to the creek. Under normal circumstances, we would have found another crossing point, but fear eliminated caution. I half slid, half fell down the slope, dragging Mia with me. Cold water soaked through my sneakers as we splashed across the shallow stream, scrambling up the opposite bank on all fours. The sounds of pursuit stopped at the creek's edge. Through the trees, I could make out the disturbance in the vegetation on the far bank, leaves and branches moving as though buffeted by a localized wind. But nothing visible crossed the water. "It stopped," Mia panted, doubled over with her hands on her knees. "Keep moving," I insisted, tugging her sleeve. "We're still too far from home." We maintained a jog for the next quarter mile, constantly glancing over our shoulders. The woods had fallen silent again, unnaturally so. No birds, no insects, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just our labored breathing and footsteps on the forest floor. When we finally spotted the edge of the tree line where the woods met my backyard, relief flooded through me. Sunlight still bathed the open yard, contrasting sharply with the gloom beneath the canopy. Just 50 more yards to safety. Mia stumbled again as we approached the forest boundary, her foot catching in a tangle of exposed roots. She went down hard, crying out in pain and surprise. I turned back, grabbing her arm and hauling her upright with strength I didn't know I possessed. "Go, go, go," I urged, practically dragging her the final distance. We burst from the tree line into the sunshine of the open yard, not stopping until we reached the back porch. Only then did we turn to look at the woods we'd fled. The trees stood silent and still, no sign of movement or disturbance. No evidence of the terror that had pursued us. "What was that?" Mia whispered, her face pale beneath smears of dirt and scratches. I shook my head, unable to form words around the fear still constricting my throat. We stood watching for several minutes, but nothing emerged from the tree line. Eventually, we retreated inside my house, locking the door behind us. For weeks afterward, neither Mia nor I ventured more than a few feet into the woods. Something fundamental had changed in our relationship with that once familiar place. We told our parents we'd been frightened by a large animal, possibly a feral dog, an explanation that satisfied the adults, but fell woefully short of capturing what we'd experienced. When we did approach the forest edge, that sensation of being watched would immediately descend, raising goosebumps on our arms even on warm days. We'd feel eyes on us from the shadows between trees, though we never saw anything concrete. I might have eventually convinced myself it had been nothing more than overactive imagination. Two children scaring themselves with shadow play and forest sounds, if not for what happened to my brother the following month. Blake was 16 and considerably less impressionable than I was. He spent most weekends riding his quad through the more remote sections of the woods, often with his friend Jason. Their excursions frequently took them deeper into the forest than I'd ever ventured, along old logging roads and game trails that extended for miles beyond our property. One Sunday in late November, they set out in the early afternoon with fishing gear strapped to their vehicles. Their destination was a deep pool beneath a small waterfall, about 3 miles from our house in the opposite direction from where Mia and I had experienced our terrifying encounter. Blake returned alone just before dusk, his face ashen and his quad splattered with mud from reckless driving. Jason arrived separately 20 minutes later, equally shaken. They'd abandoned all their fishing gear, worth hundreds of dollars, beside the creek. My parents were furious until they realized something was genuinely wrong. Blake wasn't typically prone to dramatics, yet he refused to explain what had happened until Jason had gone home. Later that night, I overheard him talking with our father in the kitchen. "It wasn't an animal, Dad. Not like anything I've ever seen around here." Blake's voice carried the same tremor I recognized from my own experience. "We were just setting up our gear when the weather changed. Got dark and cold super fast, like someone flipped a switch." "November weather can turn quickly," our father said reasonably. This wasn't normal, Blake insisted. 1 minute, perfect clear skies. Next minute, freezing cold and dark. Then we heard something coming down the trail from the north side. I moved closer to the doorway, careful to remain out of sight. At first, we thought it was someone on horseback, Blake continued. The sound was rhythmic, heavy. I called out, thinking it might be Mr. Winters checking his property line. And? My father prompted when Blake fell silent. The sound that came back wasn't human, Dad. It wasn't anything that belongs in those woods. This deep growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I felt a chill of recognition. Blake hadn't known about my experience. I hadn't told anyone in the family, afraid they'd dismiss it as childish imagination. Jason saw it first, Blake said, his voice dropping so low I had to strain to hear. Or rather, he saw the disturbance, like heat waves above hot pavement, but moving between the trees, pushing branches aside, coming right toward us. Blake, son, there has to be a logical... We left everything and ran for the quads, Blake interrupted. I've never seen Jason so scared. He's on the wrestling team, for God's sake. We fired up the engines and took off, and the whole time I swear something was right behind us, keeping pace even at 30 miles per hour through dense woods. It stopped following only when we crossed Mill Creek Bridge. There was a long silence before our father spoke again. Look, I'm not saying I don't believe you experienced something frightening, but there's always an explanation that doesn't involve... He trailed off. Doesn't involve what, Dad? I'm not saying it was a ghost or monster. I'm saying there's something in those woods that I can't explain, and it scared the hell out of me. And I'm not going back there alone. In the weeks that followed, I began researching local history, looking for anything that might explain what both my brother and I had encountered. The county library yielded old newspapers on microfiche, local history books, and collections of regional folklore. I learned that before European settlers arrived, the Lenape people had considered portions of the region sacred, or perhaps forbidden. Early colonial records mentioned areas where the indigenous guides refused to hunt or establish trails. One journal entry from a settler in 1753 described an incident where their hunting party became separated in dense woods. The lost member was found 2 days later, feverish and incoherent, claiming he'd been stalked by something that moved through the forest without disturbing branches, yet left heavy footprints in soft ground. More recent history proved equally unsettling. In 1967, a university research team conducting a wildlife survey reported equipment failures and inexplicable data readings in specific sections of the forest, the same general area where both encounters had occurred. Their report mentioned anomalous electromagnetic disturbances and unexplained thermal signatures before the study was abruptly discontinued. Most disturbing were the occasional reports of hikers and campers who had experienced similar phenomena over decades. Sudden weather changes, the sensation of being followed, unexplained sounds, and the recurring description of displacement without visible cause. Some described it as looking at nothing, but knowing something substantial is there. None of these accounts offered explanations, only confirmation that whatever lurked in those woods had been there long before my family moved to the property and would likely remain long after we departed. Winter arrived with heavy snow that transformed the forest into a monochromatic landscape of white and gray. The thick blankets seemed to pacify the woods, rendering them serene and less threatening. By January, the memory of our encounters had faded enough that Blake occasionally ventured out on his quad again, though never to the waterfall pool and never alone. I maintained my distance until March, when the first hints of spring began to emerge. Cabin fever and natural curiosity gradually overcame lingering fear. One Saturday morning, I stood at the edge of the tree line, watching as melting snow dripped from branches and early wildflowers pushed through the forest floor. Mia had moved away in December, her father's job transfer taking their family to Colorado. Without my exploration partner, I felt oddly untethered, missing our adventures despite the terror of our last outing. Perhaps that loneliness contributed to my decision to re-enter the woods alone. I chose a bright morning, telling my mother I'd remain within shouting distance of the house. The forest felt welcoming again, birds calling, squirrels chattering, sunlight streaming through branches just beginning to bud. I followed our most familiar path, the one leading to the creek crossing. Everything remained normal until I reached the water's edge. There, something shifted in the atmosphere, not dramatically as before, but subtly. The bird sounds diminished. The air grew still. That familiar sensation of being observed returned, raising the fine hairs on my arms. Across the creek, Partially obscured by a stand of young trees, I noticed something unusual. At first, I thought it might be a deer standing motionless, watching me. But as I focused, I realized I wasn't seeing an animal at all, but rather an absence, a deer-sized distortion in the visual field, like looking through uneven glass. The water between us seemed to serve as a boundary. Whatever waited on the far bank made no move to cross, no sound to threaten. We simply observed each other across the dividing line of the creek. Minutes passed in this silent standoff before I slowly, deliberately turned and walked back toward home. No pursuit followed. No growl echoed through the trees. Just the prickling awareness of being watched until I cleared the woodland boundary. 7 years have passed since those encounters in 2018. I've returned to the woods countless times since then, having developed a complex relationship with the forest and whatever inhabits its deeper regions. What began as terror gradually transformed into cautious respect, an acknowledgement of boundaries and territories. I never again experienced anything as frightening as that first encounter with Mia. But occasionally, when venturing beyond certain invisible thresholds, I'll notice the telltale signs. Sudden temperature drops, unnatural silence, that unmistakable sensation of being monitored by something just beyond normal perception. Blake eventually told me about subsequent encounters during his quad excursions, moments when he'd round a bend and find the path ahead distorted by that same visual anomaly, forcing him to find alternate routes. We compared notes, mapped locations, and gradually identified patterns. The entity, or entities, seemed to concentrate in 3 distinct areas of the forest, with the creek serving as a consistent boundary. Our family still owns the property. I'm in college now, studying ecology with a focus on conservation biology. My experiences have shaped my academic interests, driving me to understand the complex relationships between environments and their inhabitants, seen and unseen. When I return home during breaks, I still walk those familiar paths. I've developed rituals of my own, small gestures of acknowledgement when crossing certain thresholds, careful attention to subtle warnings in the forest atmosphere. I never venture into the woods after sudden weather changes. I never cross the creek during the darker half of the year. The rational part of my mind has constructed various explanations over the years. Unusual atmospheric conditions creating mirages, undocumented predators with exceptional camouflage abilities, even the possibility of hallucinations triggered by environmental factors like fungal spores or natural gas emissions. But beneath these scientific hypotheses lies a deeper understanding. Some places contain mysteries that resist categorization. The woods behind my childhood home harbor something ancient and aware, something that established its territory long before human settlement, and merely tolerates our presence under certain conditions. I no longer fear it as I once did. Instead, I've learned to coexist with the knowledge that not everything in our world fits neatly into biological classifications or scientific explanations. The forest has taught me humility and boundary respect, lessons that extend far beyond those acres of trees into every aspect of my life. Sometimes, standing at that creek crossing on bright summer days, I sense acknowledgement from the other side. Not friendship, not acceptance, but recognition. 2 different forms of awareness sharing overlapping territory, establishing wary protocols for coexistence. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's all we can ask from the ancient, unknowable things that were here long before us and will remain long after we're gone.